All right. Tell me you're joking. Coming in with a little apropos tune in honor of the subject matter and guests of the day. For those of you that are in the know, and if you don't know who this is, just honestly, you might just want to flip to the next pod because that means you don't know who the father of rock and roll is. Mr. Chuck Berry, one of St. Louis's own. Checkered past, but killer musician. Cutting edge. Did you know that in the NASA programs, right, they've had two records that were printed and sent on, I forget what.
Voyager.
Yeah, thank you, the Voyager missions. 2 albums, and on both of those albums, there's a single rock and roll song on there, and it's Mr. Chuck Berry. The rest is like Beethoven and Tchaikovsky, because they think Martians would prefer classical music. Did you know that?
I did. You know, a funny story. Where I grew up, I was in Boy Scouts, and we met at Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and they had a whole display room with a copy of that record with a little button you could play and hear everything that they put on it. So I grew up very much in my formative years listening to that record that they sent on Voyager. Yeah,
that was, I want to say, which song was it? I'm drawing a complete blank. Johnny Be Good.
Yep.
Makes sense. I think there's better songs than that, but whatever. If you're going to send it out to deep space, I mean, it worked in Back to the Future.
How funny would it be if an alien came here having heard that record and they thought Michael J. Fox was Chuck Berry?
Might have been a little bit of the inspiration there in that fine movie. We're back, another episode of Tell Me You're Joking. Today we're going to be talking about all things STL, transplant, good, bad, indifferent, ugly. You probably recognize the voice if you've listened before. We got Mr. Glass half empty, Dave Messner again. Dave, it's Friday. You've got a cold Busch latte with you. Here at the table, it's about 3:15. Is it a half-empty kind of day for you already? I mean, what kind of vibe are we looking at for this episode?
You know what? Today we're talking about talent. We're talking about talent attraction, and we're talking about regional branding. So, I don't know what's the halfway between half empty, half full. It's just middle of the road, and we'll see
I'll
where
call it the contrarian lager.
The contrarian lager it is.
It's one of those days. The other voice today, bringing some insight, opinions, and other regarding transplants, talent, and what St. Louis has to offer, what it might want to change, and more, I'm assuming. An old friend, a brief friend. We crossed paths years ago. Actually, kind of in your current role, you were doing that then.
Yeah.
Mr. Anthony Bartlett from Acclimate.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. So we've got to get this thing done because, kind of apropos to the subject matter, you got some potential transplants coming in this evening.
Oh yeah, we're coming in now, coming in hot.
Coming in hot. Are they coming in informed, or are they coming in like, what am I getting into?
They're coming in, what am I getting into? Yeah, pretty scared.
So let's take a second and just kind of maybe put a pin in the map of the resume. As I just mentioned, Acclimate is your firm, correct?
Yep. We used to be St. Louis Transplants, which is the name you might know. We were under that name for about 10 years.
Okay. So
but our healthcare clients found the name very confusing and wanted us, thought of maybe organs and limbs and whatnot. So during COVID, we just switched the name to Acclimate. So, yeah.
So Acclimate also, the business brain in me, that's also evergreen. So if Acclimate expands, St. Louis Transplants in Omaha doesn't really roll off the tongue.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yep.
Got to Acclimate Omaha.
So any middle market city, ideally, that's not on a bucket list, so to speak, which is sort of the area where we live, it could transition to that.
They have a need for acclimating.
Yep.
There we go.
Yep. Amen. You got it.
So let's again. I want to get a little historical context as to the industry's choice, kind of
Sure.
the focus vibe.
Let's do it.
What high school did you go to? Are you a St. Louisan? Are you yourself a transplant? Let's figure that out to kind of narrow it down to why here, why now, and who are you working with? And real quick, that's flipped. So
Oh, let me flip.
you got one there. There we go. You might sound better for both. Yeah, we're good. Now I bet it sounds a lot better now.
Much better.
There we go.
Wow. Yeah, I was in the gifted program at school. Thanks.
It's okay. All right, Anthony Bartlett.
What were the questions? Ladue High School. I am a St. Louisan.
Ooh.
Deep dark company secret.
Yeah. So you're a Ram.
I'm a Ram for sure.
Nice.
And really a brief plan. I went away for college, but I've been more or less in St. Louis the majority of my life.
When did you get into kind of the human transfer / placement game? And it sounds pretty illegal, but I know it's not. I mean, you guys got a public website here.
Yeah, we put a toe in 2010.
Okay.
It was really just going to be something social in nature. So I started hosting newcomers, various new neighborhoods around the city where we weren't going to talk about high school.
Yeah.
I just kind of was just going to see what happens. And then after a couple of years of doing that, those attendees and those transplants would often say, had no idea this neighborhood was here, didn't know people like this lived or existed in St. Louis. And then they would also be from various companies or institutions or hospitals around the city, and they would go, just lost my COO, just lost our chief of staff, just lost our chief of medicine for something that was social in nature or cultural in nature. And that's kind of where we found a gap or a big hole in the market that was what you would call the relocation market or the global mobility industry.
Yep.
And we really we were kind of at the precipice of really seeing how companies and lives are moved around the country into our region. And where were some of the broken pieces in that process, and then what could we do about it to, one, attract them in the first place, and then two, make St. Louis stickier so they don't leave.
So on the spectrum of headhunter or placement firm to this kind of elevated consulting and
Yep.
integration, if that's the spectrum of the world that you're kind of living in, where do you guys really fall, I would say, from like a core business perspective?
Glad you asked. Yeah. So there are recruiters. So that's going to be placement, headhunting.
Yep.
A lot of this work would often fall to realtors, real estate firms.
Frontline.
Yep, they are often on the front line. Then you've got moving logistics, so that would be locally maybe a Unigroup, Mayflower, and then you have civic and political organizations that are sort of touching that process. And then on the company side, that's usually done through HR or what they call the talent acquisition departments. What's missing there are culture, community, relationships, and that's really kind of the gap that we fell into, or we kind of slid into, to really address the issues of a new generation of talent when they are they're not moving for just the paycheck anymore.
No.
So, 60 and under are going, does the city share my values? Is it cool? Will my loved ones like it there? Again, not that, and so everyone sort of has a role. What happened in 2008 is that all of these companies were sort of merged together, bundled together. So you had companies that were like, say, a Cardis, a Serva, Altair, Wykert, these third-party relocation companies, global mobility in the global mobility industry. They really sort of have their hand on the throttle of moving everybody around the country. And this is one of the things that I don't think really, unless you're sort of in that industry, maybe some of the headhunters would know. And that's going to be Korn Ferry, Heidrick and Struggles, Spencer Stewart, and essentially all of these companies that are tasked with moving and transferring employees and people from around the country have no idea what St. Louis is. They barely know where it is. And so we really found an issue where a lot of the St. Louis employers here, how they were being moved, where they were being put.
Yeah.
You know, so for example, you'd have an overwhelming majority of 30 and under are living in, say, O'Fallon, and they're having no idea or exposure to Tower Grove or the Grove or whatever it might be.
Sure. No, Culver's country.
Correct. And so we definitely saw that a lot of the quote unquote St. Louis tours were either being taken directly to where the listings are. The tour of St. Louis, if you will, was starting at Manchester and 141 and going west of there. If they're from out of town, they essentially think everything inside of 270 is on fire.
Yeah.
So it was just a very broken system. And then also you run into the factor of every single person that's assisting a new arrival or a newcomer when they're moving here, they have something to sell to get paid.
So let
they
me
have to put them in a house.
Let me ask one last question
Sure.
about the business, and then some of the subjects that you just alluded to. I know Dave's over here chomping at the bit.
And if he's going to be glass half empty, do I have to be half full today?
I got whiskey to help us. I have a feeling it might be one of those days.
We might take a break before that.
So how a bill becomes a law. Let's talk about along those lines. Like, you have a say it's a small group, maybe not a single individual, because it sounds like some of the things you do really kind of require almost like a communal aspect to it.
For sure.
In fact, the way that we cross paths is you brought in a group of people for a happy hour to a kind of quote off the beaten path kind of place.
Yeah.
So give us an idea of what kind of the lifestyle of an Acclimate client or clients, maybe a couple people move in. What does that look like? What exactly are you guys doing for them?
Sure. So 70% of the people we work with don't live in St. Louis yet.
Sure.
So they're what we call they're a candidate. So they've had a couple of remote interviews, let's say. They've talked to the company or the hospital or the school, and they're really interested. School likes them. It's a good move for their career. And then they say, no way, I'm moving to St. Louis. We get that phone call. So the process of our company, we actually start from here, talking to them there. So the company will call us. It's a B2B. The end user does not see a bill. So that corporation or the employer will call us and say, look, we want to get them on the plane for a look and see experience.
Yeah.
So they can really sort of see a real day in the life of St. Louis or what their life might look like. So this isn't the arch and the zoo and things like that, although, we'll wave to that stuff. But we'll start to get to know them from afar, wherever they are, London, Brazil.
Yeah, I was going to say,
St.
look,
Louis.
it's Big Ben, Parliament.
Right.
Just keep driving.
And then we quite literally are there at the airport at baggage claim, or we are there at the hotel when they first arrive. And then after getting to know them, we don't have a circle or a St. Louis tour that we take them on. It's very customized. So are you a coffee drinker? Are you a tea drinker? What kind of foods do you love? What are your passions? What are your hobbies? Anything that might be, what kind of healthcare would you might need? Anything that involves your life outside the office, that's going to be part of that St. Louis experience. And then at the same time, matching them with other people who are here on the ground. So it's other New Yorkers or other people from their country of origin or where it might be. And then they kind of as lunch guests or dinner guests sort of join us for that process.
It's funny because
that's a big part of it. That's probably how we cross paths too.
Well, I love that. So maybe we jump into some concepts, as part of the conversation now, because immediately the first thing that I just envisioned was you alluded to some of the placements and they land out in O'Fallon. You used O'Fallon just as a name drop example.
Sure.
And it's west of 141. That's where we're going to take the tour.
Right.
And you also mentioned kind of like maybe the demo or the target demo that you guys are seeing tends to be a younger professional.
No, it's all over. I was just using that. And nothing against O'Fallon. I mean, I want round pegs and round holes. It is right for some people.
Yeah.
The issue is just that they're not. If you've got a mixed race couple from Queens who's looking for Tower Grove, what often happens is those tasked with helping them acclimate or move here have no idea what a city market is like or what anything is that nature. So they're not. There's a mismatch going on that we try to realign.
So that's my exact question.
Yeah.
Because I completely understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right. I think about my son and our nieces and nephews that are of that young 20, mid 20 that they're all trying to figure it out now, and I think about them potentially being out of marketers.
Yeah.
Considering St. Louis as a job place. Certain things, forget about what kind of food they like or what kind of music they like, whatever, but they're of a demo where they're not having kids. Most of them don't want to have kids anytime soon, and things like that. So how do you start to map out, or have you mapped out the region to kind of create that Venn diagram of an individual with tastes or preferences or assumed, like I said, most 25, 30-year-olds, hell, even 35-year-olds, they're not having kids that fast these days, right? So how do you map out what a human looks like with those boxes checked to neighborhoods?
Yeah, and in that particular case, these particular guys were from the Barcelona area in Spain. They're LGBTQ plus community, and they had only seen the corporate headquarters in O'Fallon. So then we started to host them at the Gramophone in the Grove, and they were upset, and they said, "Why didn't I know this was here?" And so one of the things is when they're coming from a lot of the larger, more saturated markets, one, they think that the traffic is going to be similar. So it's an hour and a half to go 5 miles there. So then they see something like Weldon Spring versus the Central West End, and that's not going to be possible from what they know. But to answer your question directly, one of the best things that we try to do is we take all the city neighborhoods, say they're coming from Brooklyn or Austin or New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, and then we kind of, it's not apples to apples, but what we do is we actually give them the neighborhood names in those cities and then put their parallel decoder here.
Wicker Park,
Correct.
Cherokee.
You got it.
And I'll jump in.
And so then they'll know what to, and so they have no idea when you say Wentzville, they have no idea what that means. When you say Des Moines or Old North or Lafayette Square.
I would love to see the Chicago map.
But just so they can kind of avoid it. So that's that's one way to do it. And then you just take their what do they want walkability? What do they want in terms of vibe? There's a million metrics and there's various things for them to look at, but nobody's really putting. And then I would say the other thing is we try to find somebody in St. Louis who's from the market from which they're moving. Yeah. And then that kind of brings the credibility, and so they get to know them a little bit.
I'm still alive.
And they're like, I'm from Sao Paulo. Yeah. This neighborhood is this. This is this. Is it Katz's Deli? No, but we're going to go to this Pretzel's place on whatever it is, and then they can kind of find their taste of home, and then we find that really gets them on the plane, and then they land in the right pocket. What a lot of people don't understand is people decide to stay somewhere within their first 7 days. So if their first 7 days go badly, or they're at the wrong hotel, whatever it might be, those experiences are really, really hard to undo. So we say talent attraction and retention, but it's often retention via good attraction. So we want that look and see trip to be fun, to be awesome. We want it with the right person, so not just the message, but the messenger. I don't want them to know any stats when they leave here, although those are fun. I want them to get home and go, that guy was cool, St. Louis was cool. Yep. I want them to be able to arm them up to enroll their loved ones in the idea, because they're going to go home to a bit of a war zone, and then they're going to have to convince their boyfriends, partners, spouses, kids, hey, I got something to tell you. I've been interviewing for this role in St. Louis, Missouri. Yep. I know we just finished our house, but we're going to be moving soon. And anything we can do to help them with that conversation, to let them know it's not that bad. In fact, it's actually awesome. That's the world and the space that we live in.
That sounds like a great company name. It's actually awesome.
And look, I think.
I
own that.
I actually like that a lot.
One of the things
St. Louis doesn't suck.
One of the things that Anthony and Acclimate has done really well, that I think a lot of people have been afraid to do in St. Louis for a long time, is actually do those comparisons and actually define what some of those neighborhoods, not necessarily what they are from the from the judgmental place that I think St. Louis tends to do from, but
Yeah.
like what, and it's really more of what's the experience, like what is the experience and who are you and what's available to you being in these areas. And I think I remember the first time that I heard of Anthony, and I didn't even know it was Anthony, but I heard of St. Louis Transplants was when I was at what was then the regional chamber. And, and what was so crazy to me was at the time I had just come from Dallas, where they did exactly this. Is they took the whole map of Dallas, the city of Dallas, and they broke down the neighborhoods,
Yep.
and they empowered the neighborhoods to say, I forget Lower Greenville, Hollywood Heights, M Streets.
Right.
What are these places, and what's the experience of being there? And I was told in no uncertain terms here in St. Louis that would be particularly offensive and perhaps untoward to do so.
Fascinating.
The second point that I would make is so you've got a ton of great graphics and data
Yeah.
and anybody else. So anybody else who's listening to this and thinks, how would I do this? Go to Anthony. The other thing that I hear you also saying is no one knows St. Louis either, right? They don't know what Wentzville is, but they also don't know what St. Louis is. And I'm saying that in a very meta way because
100%.
and I think where Anthony and I actually finally connected in real life was there was a civic meeting about the bill being proposed to merge city and county. And after all of the mayors did their grandstanding about how great St. Louis is and how their municipalities are wonderful and how we need local control and they don't believe the data that your other guest Ness
Which
Sandoval
one?
presented.
Valley Park? Were they the ones?
This was all in University City, but it was all the mayors. It was the Olivet mayor in particular who was, I don't believe the data. We're doing great, and the data doesn't lie. And Anthony got up and basically said, look, nothing of what you're talking about matters. And I think where I get incensed and where there's the glass is half empty is that what Anthony has just said, and as I'm listening, getting more incensed, is that none of the people that Anthony is bringing here have looked at Anthony and said, Anthony, why didn't you take me to City Museum, the Arch, Magic House, and all these other places?
Yeah.
Because it's a given. That's table stakes that those are there, and it's a long weekend.
They don't need us for that.
They don't need you
Yeah.
for that, and it's table stakes, and it's not why they're going to move here. They're going to move here
Yeah.
because you take them to Northwest Coffee Roasters,
Correct.
and you run into Dave, and I tell
Correct.
him about my experience at
Right.
WashU and what I know about that faculty. And I think this is where all of our, the Jobs Plan 2030 and all of the other money that gets lit on fire in our region about talent attraction and retention is that it totally misses why people actually go places. It assumes that people go places because there is a supply of readily available corporate stuff. And it totally misses the fact that there is a longing to belong and a demand for places that match and that are aligned with who I am, what I think, what I feel, what I want it to feel
Yeah.
like when I walk out of my front door into the neighborhood. And that is totally different. And so what you hear from a lot of the urbanists in St. Louis is why would anybody want to go live in that soulless hellhole, which is St. Louis County or St. Charles County? And the answer is for a lot of people, that is what they want to do. That's the life they want to live, and that's the quiet, peaceful, self-contained experience they want. They're unwilling to pay the tax or kind of live in the urban malaise that some people find to be stimulating and exciting. And it's the same reason why anybody in St. Louis would look around and be like, why the hell would anybody want to live in New York? That sounds terrible. Well, it's the same argument. It's just a different application.
Well, so the question is, do you see that in real time? Do you concur? Give us an idea of what that kind of temperature taking looks like. Because we talked about how you go through this.
I mean, so one, introducing a tourist to a city is very different than introducing to somebody who's relocated. And you mentioned Ness Sandoval and some of the things that we talk about.
Yeah.
I like to say, the emphasis is on the wrong syllable. You actually need the St. Louisans to go downtown and start doing the touristy stuff, and you actually need the out-of-towners rolling around Kirkwood. So there's sort of that process, and then two, you have the St. Louis perceptions of all the different neighborhoods, right? Versus what's somebody coming from Bed-Stuy or Silver Lake,
Right.
or Highland? What do they think of these neighborhoods? And what the out-of-towner sees in many ways is not what the St. Louisan will see. And so everybody, kind of like the schools, they're very passionate about their particular neighborhood, but oftentimes I notice the St. Louisan doesn't stop and ask and go, what do you like? What are you into? What are you looking for? The answer for the companies is there's a lot of wonderful options in St. Louis, and I'm sure you'll find one in terms of living. Go have that conversation. Instead, what you see happens is you have to live in the Central West End. If you don't live in the Central West End, you're crazy. So you have to live. Everybody sort of brings their biases to the conversation. So that's one part of it. But you were saying, Dave, about the meeting, and what I was trying to sort of intimate to the Muni mayors is that people don't. Speaking of St. Louis, I like to use the example, the Mad Men example, when Roger says to Don, I feel sorry for you, and Don says, I don't think about you at all.
Yeah.
And it's like they don't even know you're here. Like they don't even know you exist. They don't even know companies like ours have to exist to even talk them onto the plane. And so one is what can we do upstream, so to speak, to even get them here? So they know something. They either know nothing about St. Louis, as I just said, or they know something bad. So how can we 1-2 punch it?
What industry do you typically, would you say, is maybe your most popular that you work with?
It changes every year. So some years it's finance. This year has been education. Other years, next year might be healthcare.
Okay, so
plant science to, literally
let's
anything.
take the finance. Hold on one second.
Sure.
Let's take the finance crew.
Sure.
If you think back to when you were heavy in finance placements, give me an example of some of the things that maybe they indicated to you that they were looking for. Do you see trend lines within
Absolutely.
within genre of work?
Yeah.
What did that look like, and how did you cross that over into St. Louis, just as an example?
Yeah, so what you want to do is you want to learn about what's going on. So what is life like for the Morgan Stanley worker in New York City? So we'll say things like, how many kids do you have? And we'll say, I've got an 8 and 11-year-old. Say, when was the last time you saw them Monday through Friday? I say, I haven't.
Yep.
I said, would you like to? What's a commute situation, even in blended, would you like to play on a large level, family offices, AUM, with all the sophistication, but it's acceptable to be home by 6?
Yeah.
So culturally, that's something that's of interest. 2, if you're interested in the prep schools and the education market, here we have that. Very few people understand that we have that.
Yeah, at a high level.
At a very, very high level. And so, in fact, it's a lot of time letting them know that they're actually still going to have to get into the schools here, that they're not just going to be able to come from.
Yeah, they all thought they could just drop off a bag of sweet corn and that would be the tuition.
And I think, too, that they also think of St. Louis as a prairie pop-up.
Yeah.
And so they're thinking of maybe somewhere, maybe in Omaha or even a Tulsa. And what they're not thinking of is, I like to tell them, it's Boston and New Orleans had a baby. It would be St. Louis, that it's actually very northeastern in culture and more southern, that it's not western in its mentality. And then the other thing,
or Midwest,
or Midwestern, and that they don't understand is that it's a legacy market. So I think that they're picturing a new kind of a Legolandy. So they are thrilled. If they're coming from Boston, their insurance world, New England, New York City. If they're kind of into that vibe, they like, they really enjoy what they see, and that comes as a huge surprise when they're moving to a 250-year-old market. So even though they're going west and they know nothing of anything west of Pennsylvania, they're actually in many ways going to the front line in terms of their career and in terms of they're not going to a middle, farmland. Another way to say it is they think it's New York City or cows, and they don't know that there's this whole other world in between.
I think this highlights one of the things that gets me incensed about St. Louis is on a number of levels. Is that
third time you've used that word?
Really?
I'm keeping track.
I don't even.
I'm gonna start hitting the bell. Ding.
But the one thing is that St. Louis always has this perception that other people are thinking about it, and the reality is that
they're not. Yeah.
Nobody thinks about St. Louis. Nobody knows about St. Louis. If they know anything about St. Louis, it's probably not great. And if you told them that, hey, by the way, did you know we have like the arch, and or some inside baseball historic fact,
Right.
that's not a selling point. It's sort of as if we were selling St. Louis as a car. We'd say, "Did you know it has a digital air conditioning?"
It's really thirsty, and it's like, and it's very, there's a lot of it. It's please move here. There's just and I'm like, the product is great. It sells itself. But you also have to, with a little bit of intention, you have to know where to take them. When they come in, put some intention in where you put them in a walkable neighborhood. But you can't do right now they've been doing the same. They take them to the same chain restaurants. I mean, you'd be shocked at the number of the first meals are going to be, Bristol and Creve Coeur, or, one of the steakhouses, and
it's awful.
And
just go to Kirkwood and go to the Peacemaker.
And they think they're already worried that it's Cheesecake Factory everywhere, and then they see this different reality, and they're like, wow.
Let me ask a follow-up question along those lines, because both of you guys kind of alluded to the fact that, like, they don't think about us, but there's the other side of that coin, because I was of this particular mindset when I came out of college. I knew that I wanted to go away. I ended up landing in Chicago, and then I ended up traveling a lot. And my favorite travels were seeking out the cities that didn't want to be cool yet, that were cool, right? So at that time, Portland was in its infancy stages. Austin was in its infancy. And frankly, I was going down to Nashville fairly often. Nashville is nothing like it is now.
I know.
So you could still,
like, I'm like, 08, not Nashville.
Fort Worth.
Early. So my point is, like, there are these cities that today we would all claim to be hitting home runs, right? Left and right. But if you go back 15, 20 years or so, it was kind of the allure was the idea that they were off the radar. St. Louis is literally off the radar for everybody, but has that underbelly that I remember, and I've been here my whole life, and I still love going into the neighborhoods, right?
It's its greatest strength.
So how do you guys approach kind of communicating? We know you don't think about us, but think of us like
we'll own it. Yeah. So right now, I mean, I mercilessly mock the people going to Nashville and Austin and Denver. I'm like, you're distressed jeans, bro. Yeah. What is punk rock is to where the puck is going, but where it is not.
Yeah.
And what happens is, a lot of the civic boosters in St. Louis they're trying to sell it as an Austin. Yeah. And it's like, don't do that.
I heard
sell it as it is.
I heard a saying about Nashville a little recently. It was basically like Nashville jumped the shark whenever Bedazzled and 808 entered into our music videos and tunes.
Right.
I think there's another point to be made there, which is we have invested. There's two things going on at the same time. We've invested so much, or been so deferential to these authorities like Explore St. Louis or Greater St. Louis or what was the St. Louis Regional Chamber to do this civic marketing. And what we get are these, like the Andy Cohen videos where he basically says, "Hey, come to St. Louis."
Yeah, but
we got shopping.
In fairness, let me play devil's advocate real quick on the Explore St. Louis, because they get paid by hotel revenue.
And that's totally fine, because what they do, and what I think what Brad Dean will and Ed will be doing incredibly well, is marketing to tourists. And like Anthony said, that is a
a role, absolutely.
It's a very different message.
But it's not what you guys
than it is what we need to be doing in the region.
Good 1-2 punch.
And so this is the intersection. Is what's happened is that the message of Explore St. Louis for many years became the same thing that we were saying about the St. Louis region. And to Anthony's point, it's also what a lot of people in St. Louis say about it. And what is that? It's the Arch and City Museum and Forest Park and Tower Grove Park and the Science Center and Magic House. And my response to that is, that sounds like a great long weekend, not a thesis to live.
Right.
And what the other piece that's missing, though, is that those civic boosters, when you listen to them talk about why you should live in St. Louis, they're not even talking about where the puck is. They're talking about where the puck was in like 1904. It's stuff like, St. Louis used to be the fourth largest city after Chicago, and nobody cares. Absolutely nobody cares. It's an interesting fact for people who are here, who are trying to hang on to something.
New tagline: it's cheap, cool, and you won't die.
Well, that's the other point. Is if something's on sale and there's no demand, is that a place that you want to go? Do you want to go shop at Burlington Coat Factory because it's about to shut down?
I'd see. I would challenge that premise along the lines of probably what you see every single day. I think that the demand we have baked in demand that has not been presented to the market effectively.
Correct.
From who?
Go to any neighborhood. If you get out,
Okay, that's fair. But I think
but what I mean is you have the tools, you have the assets, you have the culture, you have the
Yes.
history. You got the quote cool kids that are now making fun of
For sure.
PBR. Like that exists here.
correct. We have a great product, but an absolutely terrible price structure and an absolutely terrible marketing team. And I think the
Price structures. Explain that one.
so outside of St. Louis, when we talk about things like it is an affordable, low-cost place to live,
Yes.
when then you go downtown or you go throughout the city or even some places in the county, you say, yeah, it's cheap. It's the dollar store strategy, not the Nordstrom strategy. And we have a Nordstrom product.
No, I
It
don't
doesn't-
agree with that.
Are you kidding?
Have you been to Webster? I live
Yep,
there.
but Webster is a totally Webster is not and I think this represents part of the problem. If you live in Webster and you hang around Webster and
What
Tower
about
Grove,
Kirkwood?
Webster, Kirkwood, Tower Grove, this is like an immense, dense area. And what's happening in the region is an increasingly white, increasingly educated, increasingly affluent population centered between Midtown and
Well,
Webster.
we've got the pro here. Do you
Yeah.
agree with that take?
Which part?
The last part.
But look, our regional population is declining.
Which part? Why
can't-
did I agree to this?
So we can't say that we have a value proposition or a product that's selling because the store is literally closing and going out of business.
No, I'm differentiating between what we have on the shelves and the experience that we have within the not the potential store, within the store. I would agree with you that the sales and marketing team aren't doing their job. I think there's a difference between the two.
I guess to thread the needle here, we have one of the best boutiques in the country, filled with the highest quality goods for a wide variety of people. But the sign on the door says "out to lunch," and the other problem is that when we are communicating this, what we are not doing is what Anthony is doing is saying, "JB, you seem to me like a Webster guy. Let me take you to Webster." What we're saying is that St. Louis has everything for everybody, and y'all should come, or you're dummies.
I don't have a vest.
And that's why it's not landing, right? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I would. I mean, Webster is first off, nobody knows it's there, and it absolutely crushes it with out of towner.
Webster
we go to Old Orchard.
Is the Oak Park?
Correct.
Yeah.
And so they're just not seeing it. All of the different markets and neighborhoods. So I don't really fully understand why.
Well, let me ask you.
I feel like other cities unroll very quickly, and
Yeah.
they unroll and with density. There's a way to instantly sort of understand whether you land in San Diego, bam. You land in Washington D.C., bam. You land in Louisville, Indianapolis. All of these it goes quickly. And then St. Louis is still sort of the city of speakeasies and curtains, and you're also island hopping, so you can't just go to the Grove and then go from place to place to place unless you really know what you're doing.
So let me ask you real quick.
Big issue.
The terminology that Dave's used in the past, and he just referenced it a second ago, is St. Louis has this kind of dollar store mentality and needs to focus on more a Nordstrom approach.
Agree with that.
How would you describe the goods that we have? Because it doesn't feel.
I don't feel like they need to be. Some might want to use the word affordable, but my opinions on selling St. Louis as cheap are fairly well known, and I do not think that is the right strategy. In fact, I think that people coming from large markets want a premium to move to St. Louis. So, say for example, I'm transferring you to a hospital in Mount Vernon, Illinois.
Yeah.
Do you want less money or more?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right. And so they actually want that. And so that strategy, that it's cheap, that it's, and that to go to all of the parks and the zoos, nobody's moving anywhere for a zoo.
Right.
The zoo is incredible. Once you're living here, it's an amazing asset. But you're not moving to Burkina Faso because they have awesome zoos. Sorry. But that is what I also think too, there's a big factor. 70% of the population of St. Louis are native to St. Louis.
Right.
So they have not moved. They haven't rented an apartment in 25 years. They have no idea what the costs are. They haven't come from these other things. And so, again, they haven't come from these other places. They haven't done it, which is another big factor. And so focus on, you want to move because it's awesome, not because it's cheap. You want to move because this, maybe I do sell the accessibility, but, in terms of the boutiques and the food and the outdoors and the music and all of that, there is a certain profile of a persona who wants to be somewhere that...
Well, it's along the lines of, we still sell G-Wagons here. It's just that your commute is a little shorter.
Yeah.
And they're all
so
they're all black and silver.
So there's that.
It's true. Or white.
There's that Nordstrom dollar store mashup. We don't have traffic here. Hey,
Right.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to get some refills, take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk St. Louis branding. We're going to allow Dave to just let her rip and see how long Anthony's willing to stick around. So we'll be right back. Tell me
Get into my yang. I love it.
Like, review, follow, share. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Quick break.
So here's where we're jumping in.
Well, hold on a second, though. I'm teeing this up. I'm not going to let the music go without a little love, because we're here to sell the city of St. Louis, right?
Pay your respects.
And I did the Explore STL thing out of the gate, and I dropped a little Chuck Berry, right? I didn't play Johnny Be Good. I went with a little bit of slightly deeper cut, like his third best hit.
Are we going to sign off with Meet Me in St. Louis?
Hell no. No, I'm going to prove our point. I'm going to live by the virtues of our conversation.
But does anybody know there are 300 live shows here a week? Does anybody know the venues? Does anybody know the level of show you can see in the space that you can see it in, get there in 20 minutes?
No, we
they
used
have
to go
no idea.
We used to go to Mississippi Nights 20 years ago, so I don't think there's any more live. Mississippi Nights closed, so there's no more live music.
Yeah, so I'm rolling us in here with a little of South St. Louis's own, the Manis brothers. Two brothers.
Outstanding.
Little dirty blues. River blues is technically what it is, but they're pretty dirty. Drummer, guitarist, vocals, that's it. You could find in the day when they were really grinding, pop into name the dive bar south of Manchester, and you could find them. That's the shit that we have. Look, St. Louis is not unique in that in that aspect. Every city in America has little rock and roll kids, and it's got its little artists and all of that. It's the cities that get it are the ones that kind of figure out how to balance, the growth and the promotion and
do you feel that some of these artists, were they in Austin, when they would
1,000%.
I feel like they would be known nation or worldwide.
So they
don't leave St. Louis.
So we met probably, and my guess would have been, if I'm guessing, 17, 18. It was pre-COVID when you were coming in over at Gaslight Studio on the Hill. And, that was really kind of my premise there behind the scenes within the studio and the musicians that we were working on. I flat out told them, against my own self-interest, those that I believe that were like really kind of, like in sports, there's everybody wants to be a pro, but there's really only truly 1%ers.
Yeah.
And there is always a handful of 1%ers around here, but their realized opportunity, their realized growth is stymied in this market for a multitude of reasons that are mainly music business / industry based. Because again, if two brothers like the Manis brothers, were to be in Austin, or to have been in Nashville,
New Orleans,
lights out. Yeah. Now, would they be filling stadiums? Who knows? Realistically, probably not. But would they have had a significant run down the runway to try and take off in another city compared to here? 1,000%.
I think that's a great, not what I was going to talk about, but a great segue to one of the reasons, one of the shortcomings of St. Louis is that part of the reason why nobody's thinking about St. Louis outside of St. Louis is that if you are anywhere in the world, what would you open a book and say, I would like to be the best in the world, and to do that, I have to be in St. Louis? What would the answer to that be?
Yeah, but that's a tough one though, because if somebody, what does Dallas have that somebody thinking about whatever it is that Dallas has would say? If I want to be the best in the world at this, I have to go to Dallas.
Spread that out a little. Okay, so maybe it's not the best in the world to be in Dallas, but Dallas has its own value proposition, which for a long time has been, this is a place with economic growth, upward economic mobility, a relatively to my income low cost of living. And I compare Dallas and St. Louis all the
You
time.
mean suburban spread is
That's
what you're
hey, but you know what? For most, for most people, simply having upward economic mobility and not even economic stability necessarily, but that opportunity is enough to locate somewhere. And I think one of the things that we, going back to what I was going to lead in with, which is the study that WashU did about how do we attract and retain more graduates. And the simple answer is the same thing that I said when I did my MBA at WashU was, you need to pay kids more. When an MBA spends the money to go to WashU and they get an offer from some firm in St. Louis for $85,000 and they get an offer from a firm in Chicago for $120,000, unless the only caveat, and I think the one outlier to all of the data in St. Louis, is if you don't have a family connection here that provides some inordinate value in terms of, well, I'm going to have kids or otherwise, you are going to Chicago 100% of the time, because despite the quote unquote low cost of living or quote unquote affordability in St. Louis, the implied demand for people when they say, well, you should be in St. Louis because it's got a low cost of living and walkable neighborhoods, et cetera, is that you forego many millions of dollars of future earnings based on that first job or your upward mobility potential. The second part in St. Louis that we don't recognize is that you have a gray ceiling of middle managers and executives that aren't going anywhere. So there's a point in the career life and somebody in St. Louis where I'm going to get to a certain point, and unless I either venture out on my own or somebody dies or somebody relocates, I'm not moving up in this company, which isn't the same in larger markets. Now, I don't know how you go about addressing that, but I think the two and two go hand in hand. And a rational, highly educated person is going to say, what is the domicile in which I will have the greatest amount of upward economic mobility, the greatest economic opportunities, and it's a very small population of people who are gonna pick somewhere like St. Louis because they want just a middling stable lifestyle.
Yeah, no, you know what? I believe it's exponentially more than an economic argument. I would say that if in your example, the 85 versus 120, St. Louis to Chicago, I would say that number really is probably 85 to 90, 95. It doesn't matter. You can close the delta on the numbers, and that's not what this generation of kids that are new professionals, they want to be someplace cool. They want to be integrated. They are so used to being under the thumb of debt. Like it's baked into their mantra right now. So it's where am I going to hang out? Who's in my building? What pub's on the corner? Way more than what you're talking about is millionaire next door shit.
No,
they're not even contemplating.
No, if
stocks.
you look at the actual data between the cost of living, if you take
let's ask our
take the salary,
bake a question into your soapbox.
take the salary of what you would make in St. Louis. Take that same salary to somebody like Dallas, and then look down the road 5 years. You will demonstrably, in most cases, be better off in Dallas, Austin, or Houston, despite the higher cost of living. Why? Because when you take into account the overall tax burden of living in the city of St. Louis County, or the region, that you are going to have less disposable income, and therefore your quality of life will be lower. This is the reason why we lean so heavily on all these free amenities, because nobody has the disposable income to do things. And the anecdotal evidence of that is I live out in Wildwood.
We're not there.
Let's talk to the pro.
I mean, he's not. You're not wrong. I do. You also have to add in the factor. You have to add in a car.
Sure.
Add in some other expenses that they don't have in those markets. I also agree with JB. They are choosing the job very much based on culture and city fit, as opposed to just the number. They're going to be broken in debt anyway. So that is something very far more recent. I do think that high salary and offer used to have much more of an impact than maybe it does now.
I think there's also the other factor that's going on there And one of the things that we do really horribly in marketing St. Louis is that we try to explain and use logic on a irrational problem. And so that's JB where I would agree and disagree with you, is that economically you may be even between those two places because you got to pay more in gas and you got to have a car and you can't do all these things. However,
you have state income and then you have property down there.
My perceived
Tolls.
my perceived quality of life and economic circumstances in those markets are better. And the evidence I have for this, regardless of any of the
would you agree that you're pointing to a demo that's primarily homogenous white middle class to upper middle class?
No, because you can point to Atlanta the same way. In Atlanta, people there are lower income African American families in St. Louis that are going to Chicago, Memphis, and Atlanta in greater numbers than they are coming here.
Yeah,
and the only other evidence that I need to, I don't know that I'm right, but I know that the current strategy is wrong. And the only evidence I need for that is that our in-migration is negative every single year.
When you say strategy in terms of salary, you're saying to match it, to pay lower?
No, the current economic development program in St. Louis has been for a very long time that St. Louis and Missouri is a low cost of labor domicile. And the evidence for this especially was when they tried to attract Amazon HQ2. The literal line, and I've used this for a decade, was you could pay your employees 85% of what you pay them in Seattle, and they would have an equivalent quality of life.
That's got to stop.
This is an absolutely destructive Midwest logical answer to a otherwise irrational problem. And this is why we fail in marketing and branding.
You're kind of creating a hamster wheel on your own argument in so much that you say it's about upward economic mobility, but then in the same breath you're saying we shouldn't sell the discounted value to these companies because the spending power goes further. Those two things are both sides of the coin.
It's a little bit of a throwaway line, but the truism is more is in fact more, and more is a factor unto itself. And so the fact that I can go to Chicago and make $120,000 fresh out of school, even if after I pay my taxes and higher rent and everything else, I'm the same level as where I was in St. Louis, my expectation and therefore my perception of the sunk cost of that activity is that 5 years from then, I'll be making $250,000 for two reasons. One, because I'll either get promoted because there's enough economic growth in those areas to justify that growth, or two, I will have enough spending power if I live frugally to pay off all of my debts and then go to a low-cost locale. The issue we have here is that our median wage, if you look at median wage, right, one of the things that drives the statistics so wacky in St. Louis is that you have really, really high people working in finance or law who are making really high wages. They live in Lafayette Square, Tower Grove. But then you have the median wage, which is $54,000, and a highly regressive tax system. So the entry-level job right now is what, $50,000? If you look at the burden of entry into the market and you think about the reasons why there is no entertainment district in St. Louis, it's that young people, a lot of the reason why they're having kids later, a lot of the reason why they're not buying houses, a lot of the reason why they're not doing a lot of things is that they have a really high tax burden and a really high cost of living relative to their earnings and their earning potential. So when we have an economic development strategy that is focused on low cost of labor and pay your employees less because it's affordable to live here, what you are essentially doing is killing two parts of the market.
Yeah, well, let me come in because we got to get to questions every now and then here too. Here's where I'm going with this. I spent my 8 years of the first prime earning years in Chicago in a market in which everything was more expensive. Bought my first townhouse there, et cetera, et cetera. Came home. The wage trajectory at that point, once you get 5, 6, 7 years in industry, you're not going to see a dip. You're going to move at par +1, right? Wherever you go. It's easy for people in our market to say a regressive tax society or environment that we live in and completely ignore the fact that, like, for example, in Webster Groves, right? If my house were in Bucktown or Humboldt Park where I lived up there, I would be spending 4x in property tax, right? I'm not. And so then my personal property comes into play. I'm like, okay, fine, because the 4x up there in these markets is so exponentially higher. as much as it's annoying, and even bless you, the state income and property, everything else, you add it all up, it's still less than a major metro market. So it's our tax policy strategy in the state of Missouri is extremely fractured and annoying, and I don't like buying a car and then going to DMV and doing all these things.
They do not love the property.
But I'm not trying to be argumentative, but I think where I would argue with where I would argue with your argument though is that in Chicago there is demand. There is outside of small pockets in St. Louis, there is no demand.
Well,
that's
kind of ultimately my point.
Yeah.
And to you, Anthony, like what I was kind of alluding to earlier, and maybe just chime in with your own soapbox at this point, as far as what you're seeing in what do these new industry, younger gen, what are they valuing in your experience? Is it the chase of the package? Is it home ownership, or is it just rent? Because a lot of them don't even want to own because they don't want the maintenance and the responsibility of the light bulb.
So
right?
the difference between a 25-year-old and a 32-year-old is
Go ahead and stay a little closer on the mic there if you don't mind.
vast. So essentially, you've got early professionals just out of school.
Yeah.
And I think that you're not going to fix the FOMO, so to speak, if they grew up in St. Louis and they live in the Midwest. Until they've gone to those larger markets, it's very, very hard to retain them. So what you have is a lot of the employers here in the region try to seek hiring students and graduates coming from any one of the 30 universities here. But if those young people or early professionals want to go have other experiences, no matter how high their quality of life, no matter how high their, no matter what rent or however they are doing financially, they're going to want to go get that experience.
Right.
Now, once you've been in Chicago and LA and New York and you want to come back and it's time to buy a single family home, you do have some major advantages. Not as cheap as people think, but an inventory, if you're in the Southern California market, you want to do a single family home, you're starting at around $900, $950.
Yeah. Good luck with the 20%
Here in
down.
St. Louis, you still have the Baldwins and the Maplewoods and St. Anne's, whatever it might be that you're looking for. That is still a possibility. That is not the same in another market. Where you've seen also a giant shift though is in rent. So St. Louis rentals are much higher than they are, and even in some of the consumables. I mean, so we were actually bringing down a bunch of folks from Northwestern who are making the move from Evanston and Wilmette to St. Louis. So our company goes up there and we spend some time. We're looking at the homes that are they're comparable in terms of price. I can't speak to the taxes, but we go to the grocery stores, we're at Trader Joe's, we're going to the pubs, we're going to all of the different having all the different experiences, and what is it that they miss most coming down? It is, for that age and demographic, it's vibe.
Yeah.
So what we are missing is that vibe. There's some things, if we're going to do the glasses half full, that we can kind of turn to, i.e. St. Louisans don't, St. Louis companies are very slow to hire you, but they also don't fire you. And so if you're done with turnover, if you're done with churn, if you're done with feeling like a number, or you want to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, and some of these young people are actually looking for the permanency that they're not finding in Chicago, where a lot of companies sort of have this strategy, let's throw a bunch of new hires up against the wall, let's see who sticks. St. Louisans won't do that. There's other things that we do that are maybe more problematic. And then there's also the impact, right? So as a young person, a lot of them will say things like, I missed the redevelopment in Brooklyn. I missed the Renaissance. I can't be a part of it in these markets, but in St. Louis, here I could be a part of it. So, show them what's going on, and in the Del Mar Divine, what's going on Cherokee, wherever it might be, whatever it is that they're looking to do. Here, you can participate in that.
Yep.
And so those are the things. Instead of just cost of living, it's actually more sociocultural, I think. And then to enjoy, we're talking about music. the grind of just seeing your friends and going to a dinner party or doing anything in New York City or even Brooklyn now or whatnot, even just you set out to run a couple errands in Atlanta. I mean, I actually just had a young client move from the DC area.
Yeah.
And he was just like, it's just, the people are smart and it's super interesting and there's all of these wonderful dynamics. It's very electric, but he's like going to Target and just the basic things, and he has some health issues. And so it's just not, so you have to think of it logistically, but also I think sell that opportunity. Don't sell it as this fully formed, we're just like X or we're just like City Y. But look, here's where we're lacking. Here's where you're needed. You tired of feeling like a number. You want to be appreciated. You want to come in and make that impact and bring there to here. Oh, that was in Denver, but that's not in St. Louis. Sounds like one of those opportunities. And when you spin it that way, there's a real, it was ludicrous to me that we were losing so many young people or their parents were forcing them to lose because of St. Louis's issue or Ferguson or whatever those might be. I'm like, don't you want to come to where you're needed? Why should you be ashamed? So they'll say, well, Missouri politically or whatever, but, we have differing values. I go, well, whatever your objective is, this is where you can come and see the ripple effect of what you do. And I think when you take that angle on it, particularly for a young person, don't go, wow, you're going to go change hearts and minds in the Mission District of San Francisco. Like it's already wherever you think it should be. Come here.
Let's play a game. Let me just, I'm going to name two cities. I'm going to name third one being St. Louis. So let's say Charlotte and Denver. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Two cities that I would consider. They're thriving. They're doing very, very well.
Thriving, killing.
But from an MSA standpoint, from an infrastructure standpoint, there's similarities.
Very.
Number one, they both have high financial services industry is prevalent.
Yep.
Top class universities are in those markets everywhere. In both of those markets, you've got huge hospital networks, that are kind of cutting edge, but a combination of research, teach, et cetera. So when you look at those things, Denver, St. Louis, Charlotte, if you're sitting down and competing as the rep for St. Louis, what's two or three things? Knowing those two markets have that kind of similar Venn overlap, what are things that jump out to you that, like, if you're swinging, what are you swinging with?
So you have to spend time in those markets and go, what's good, better, same, worse, right? So for example, Research Triangle in Charlotte, kicks our butt in a lot of different areas, right? One area that we focus on for the people coming from the North Carolina market is going to be schools. So they're redrawing boundaries constantly. In terms of, I've got kids in North Carolina who are moving and the kids are on school buses for, an hour and a half each way. There are some things and then there are also assets there that are just, where they do have us beat. So it's an easier sell, but once you're here, it's not for me in terms of if some people want a little bit of the history, the grit, the soul, the pathos, the texture, they're not as comfortable actually in the North Carolina market as they are in, say, a market like St. Louis. One of the big factors in the Denver market, homelessness is a big thing, and then they have the sunlight, so that's good. But the other factor is that they're running out of water. And then so we kind of talk about, you're coming to a market that has more water than any city in the world. So, you kind of have to find that edge in each of it. There's also a factor of Denver in terms of, again, that's a little bit of a new market, right? So architecturally, we find that some people will like St. Louis better. It's also, if you kind of like a little bit of the underdog, back to sort of the punk rock point. Yeah. Denver it's already kind of happened. It's already sort of become a thing. If you love the outdoors, we don't necessarily have the same thing, but we do have some great outdoors. We've got the trails. We've got the so many things that I don't think are really well marketed. I've had a lot of people leave Denver. They don't find it to be very diverse. And here we have a lot more diversity that I think is actually an appeal, particularly to younger talent.
Yeah.
So I and again, there's something about eating at a restaurant that's 100 years old. There's something about being in a place that I think young people kind of like, but it is sort of the facts. I like to say that there's cities of roots and there's cities of wings. Denver and Charlotte are cities of wings. They're nobody's from there. It doesn't have legacy issues that St. Louis might have. So you do have to be honest about who wants to sort of come in to more of a city of roots and a city of legacy and a city of history versus a newer market out there.
Yep.
The other thing, particularly for the Catholic communities or other religion in general, they don't have the 300 independent private school system. That is just not a thing in the Western market that it is here in St. Louis. And then, so people
you're saying
point that stuff out.
There's an opportunity for the Jesuits out there?
Yeah, there's definitely.
West.
I think there's one or two. Yeah, but the restaurants are. I mean, talk about chains. Talk about it's not. It's
sterile.
But
it's sterile. Yeah,
I think where
it's antiseptic.
I think where you are totally accurate is everything you said, and where I would highlight a small differentiation is on a few levels. One is that the cost of living in Denver, you have to adjust for both the actual cost, but also the ratio relative to wages. And I think there's the tax burden in Colorado is much lower, the wages are higher, and the properties are more expensive. This is also where you get into that California trap where there is a housing problem in California with the cost of living, but that's demand driven and also more specifically policy driven, but you are also making more money. And so I think a lot of times what happens is
there's no question.
People in St. Louis are thinking, well, the median wage here is $58,000. How would I ever make? How would I ever buy a $1 million house? But the reality is the median wage in California is like $76,000, which is still unaffordable, but that's that's a big difference. The second thing is that what most people don't recognize is that when JB made the great point, Research Triangle, Fort Worth, Denver, Austin, 20 years ago, these were small towns and they've grown. St. Louis has atrophied. And so what this indicates to me is that there's something else going on. And I think part of that, when Denver grew, that first wave of new Denverites came from Ohio, which I don't think anybody would really know. And what they were doing is they were making the choice of, I don't think I'd like to go to Chicago. I'm going to go to Denver. And what keeps coming up to me is this question of, who do I become when I go to these places? Why did they choose Denver over Chicago? Sunlight, outdoors, recreation, and I think an active social life that you don't get in Chicago, part of which is because of the weather in the winter. Same thing I think is true for Research Triangle. That is there is a lifestyle there that is, I think, predictable, and I don't know what it is specifically there, but I think that again is attractive as well. Where we have the shortcoming in St. Louis is that it goes back to the question of, who will I become when I get to this place? What is it? And St. Louis has taken the approach of, well, we're everything to everybody and therefore it's for nobody. And I think that's a point of fear for us, is to say, what is the high potential customer here? Now, that's where I think there's a lot of great opportunity. I think for the last 20, 30 years, it seems like St. Louis has been optimized and focusing on this maybe 40-year-old customer with kids family. So it's schools, low cost of living, you've been somewhere else, now come here. And I think the problem with that is that's a very sticky customer to try to grapple away from somewhere else unless they're getting relocated. Right. And this is where I think we have failed, because then you start to ask the questions that families do. Well, how are the schools? And they're not going, it's schools and museums, but then it's, well, I'm not going out to dinner because all my money goes to daycare sports and other stuff, or I'm on travel sports and I'm doing everything else.
Well, what do you think about recruiting out of those markets to St. Louis?
That's where I totally agree. And I think this is where
so for the Bostonian, the kiddo who loves St. Louis, Louis. A lot of these cities and markets, and they're all over southern,
Yeah.
northeast. Moving to St. Louis is the radical act.
Yes.
And so that's kind of the
That's
that,
where I was
and,
But-
and that's the way to that's the way, and then changing there. But the problem is they are treating that early professional coming right when they get off campus like the 30 something with with 1.5
Yes,
kids trying to do that. So that is very fixable to me.
It's
And,
totally in the
yeah.
presentation of the product. And that goes back
Yeah.
to, we have this boutique of products that are like
Yeah.
diamonds. We have these racks of diamonds, but we're presenting it like it's like a Burlington coat factory on the outside. And I think so I'll give you the example. If you talk to somebody in Brooklyn, and I wrote about this.
Yeah.
Show them a brownstone in Brooklyn or Boston or wherever,
Right.
and then show them Benton Park,
Yeah, perfect example.
right?
Do it all the
And just
time.
say, hey, why don't you just look at these two?
Right.
Do you want to pay $6 million
Right.
for this, or do you want to pay $250,000 for this?
Right.
And you can actually have some equity. That is, again, an economic argument that sells. That dog hunts. What doesn't hunt, though, is to say, oh, this creative area along Cherokee and Benton Park is the same as Old North. It's the same as the Ville. It's the same as every other place where we have brick buildings
I
here.
think it's part of the vetting process. You do have to ask. Some people want to be part of a city that's already arrived. Some people like to root for the New York Yankees.
Yes.
They're not into
Yeah.
the underdog. They want to be somewhere that's
I-
not in process, but it's already here. Other people are excited and invigorated by it's not here yet, and I get to be a part of that.
I always think of, and I haven't pulled it up in a long time, but there was this book. It was a study basically on late '80s, early '90s Sub Pop, Seattle, and there was a segment within it in which it pointed out like, okay, it was trying to figure out why and how did grunge break in Seattle, because at that time Seattle was not popping.
Yeah.
It was dreary,
Right.
wet, it was
Hard to get to, far away.
hard to
Yep.
get to. It had a weird demo population going on
Yeah.
there, but it had an underbelly. And then when you get into it, you start to look at some of the parallel things that were going on in industry at that time in the late 80s, early 90s, which would have been the growth of Microsoft, which would have been the early iteration of Amazon. It would have been, this kind of tech underbelly. And their issue was solved by the pop culture in so much
Right.
that they leaned into, they weren't selling the zoo or the wheel or the needle. They were helping fund these small artistic endeavors, i.e. Sub Pop Records. And then what happened is once you get a few rock and roll kids that sign a major label deal and then turn
Yeah.
into Nirvana, every other kid in America that wants to be the next grunge rock star, no matter where they're from, where are they going?
This is, but again, it goes back to what I'm saying.
No, hold on though.
Who will
Hold
you
on though.
become when you
Here's
go there? Yeah.
here's the second part of the equation. This is what the community, the business community, had figured out. They're like, we're not gonna help just so that we can grow a music scene. All young musicians turn into middle-aged musicians or bored musicians or broke musicians who need jobs. And so they started, it created this like population, flywheel that everybody wanted to come there because it was cool.
And music is kind of a fit for tech.
I
Why-
totally agree.
Bingo.
I
They all
totally,
become IT. They all became developers,
and-
coders.
I totally agree with this.
I never thought of that,
But here's
Yeah.
here's another point to this is that I think one of the things that is distortionary in a lot of markets, whether it's Seattle, San Francisco, or LA, is the tech money. And I think St. Louis has tried to chase this Silicon Prairie meme for a long time. And there's a couple things that have not followed on with that, to use your example in St. Louis. So in my view, from the outside, growing up in Los Angeles and being in Dallas, St. Louis's heyday was when Mark McGwire was hitting home runs, Nelly was putting out record hits, and the Cardinals were winning World Series. That's it. That's the last time anybody really cared about St. Louis in the pop culture in a positive way. And I don't think that it is inconceivable that St. Louis could have that pop culture moment. But here's where I think we're going to run into a wall. Let's say St. Louis caught lightning in a bottle for whatever reason. Let's say the Blues won the Stanley Cup, the Cardinals won the World Series, the Battlehawks win a championship, and all of a sudden we get a new football team or something like that.
It wouldn't matter.
The issue we will run into,
It's
to use
not
your
gonna make-
example,
it won't make a difference.
well, let's say for some reason you had a Nirvana moment and you had to be in, if you were going to be X, you had to be in St. Louis. One of the things that happened in St. Louis is you had this run that led to, big air quotes, gentrification and development. And I think St. Louis would get in its own way in trying to control it too much because we have a middle managerial, risk-averse, conservative attitude that is also highlighted by a very closed culture. People in St. Louis, if you talk to most transplants in St. Louis, the people are very nice and they're very polite and they will help you. But you will never be sitting in their barbecue. You will never be at their Thanksgiving.
Invited.
And you will never be invited anywhere else. Why?
You went to
they have
the wrong high school.
or they have the same 10 buddies that they went through confirmation class, SLU high or whatever.
Right.
And this extends also to a lot of the business activities in St. Louis. And this is a core problem. So when people ask why hasn't the entrepreneurial space in St. Louis kicked off, we have all of the tools and all of the resources, but the mindset and the attitude is wrong. And Anthony made the point, which is in places like Research Triangle, in places like Fort Worth and Dallas and Los Angeles, Chicago and Houston and Austin, like all these places, there is an expectation that people will come and go. So I better make friendships fast and I will expect them to disappear and I will network forever. If I am in St. Louis, the expectation is that I am from here, will be here, and will continue to be here forever, and that by leaving it's somehow a betrayal, or that like I will not trust you until I know you will be here forever because
It sounds like you're from someplace else.
what do you think? Is that,
Yeah, I mean, well,
There's not one person who doesn't think-
Well, let's one. I don't. So what you were talking about, JB, with Seattle. So what's our hook? What's our brand? What's our thing?
Correct.
I don't have the answer to that yet.
Yeah.
I do think one is needed. It is not hustle and innovation and risk, and it's a very different environment than Dallas. Here it is. They want establishment. But, if you look at the money managers, you look at, basically it's Charlotte, maybe, or New York, and then it's St. Louis in terms of finance.
Right.
In that world. Big research, big medicine, for the people who are done trailblazing, who are done taking a chance. This is a market and a community founded by French, settled by Germans, where when you're done with that part of your life, this is a great place to protect, to grow assets, to not take huge chances. Wherever we end up, I'm a big believer in go with the resistance. Let's own what we have.
Yeah.
And
The halfway city.
And I have a big there are, if you look at the foundations and the history of Mallinckrodt, Monsanto, McDonnell Douglas, Express Scripts, Centene, all of these companies, so many of the industries here, what is one thing that they all have in common? Many of them did not want to be found.
Right.
Yes.
And then you also have a legacy economy, all of the unearned income, the amount of money and trust that's here. So here it's more of a culture of protection, keep what you have, don't risk what you have. Here it's a culture of privacy.
Here
it's a culture of protection and privacy, suspicion a little bit. And so there are some things that you can do to work with that and to just be like, look, this is, in many ways, there are a lot of people here who don't want to be found. Quiet luxury, like that is a St. Louis thing. Like it's not unlike Dallas, Miami, Atlanta, New York, California. You kind of want everything understated. And so there are angles to take to go, look, when you're done with that part of your life, or you want to come here and have a little bit of an easier life. A lot of people don't want to become Portland. They don't want to become Chicago. They don't want to become Seattle or Denver. And they've gone to great lengths to do that. So I think that there's a way to let people know that there are still places in St. Louis, sort of the vintage, that still exist here. There is a world that still exists here that doesn't exist in other markets. And so go with that.
Let me ask you a question then. From a non-industry perspective, more from a cultural / services / vibe perspective.
Yes.
What do we do really well, kind of in your experience? Is it? I mean, I'm going to assume the answer is it our culinary scene? Is it our
For sure.
craft breweries? Is it,
For sure.
Even, I hate to say it, the free stuff, our parks, kind of infrastructure. What do we do well or really well compared to maybe competing markets that you can kind of, be proud to stand behind?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things that you just said, what would it take to get a reservation at Rayo's in New York versus, Louis here, right? So since it is not known, I think that a lot of people feel like, so you're going to the second oldest symphony in the country, and it's just not, the logistics are just not, so the quality is there if they're going to go to Slam. It's, a lot of things, they love the museum, but they're like, I have not been able to enjoy any of the shows and the amenities and the teams in Philly or in New York or the market in which I'm coming from, or even in Hong Kong, whatever it might be, because it's just so difficult and the accessibility isn't there. And here, it's not only that you have it, but it's actually accessible. So, is it MoMA? No, but it's pretty damn close. It's good enough, and you can get there.
Yeah.
And that is sort of the
park in front.
Right, and you can park. You can get
Move
to
to
it.
St.
And
Louis.
so
You can park in front.
The quality of, so I've got people from London and San Francisco and coming from all over the world, and they're going. Not only was this restaurant phenomenal, but I can come back.
Yeah.
It's not, even within their own city, if you fall in love with an unbelievable restaurant in Georgetown or Alexandria or wherever, you're not going back. I fell in love with this distillery in San Diego. It's called Seven Caves. It was unbelievable. One of the best afternoons of my life. I'm never going back to that. It was 2.5 hours and you go at the wrong time.
Yeah.
And so to see the show, you want to enjoy the wineries, you want to enjoy a small show, you want to enjoy a large show. So you sort of have those things, but you can get to it. So I think that those are some of the things that, is it the mountains of Denver or of Utah? No. But, to get to that trail, to get to Zombie Trail or wherever it might be, or to enjoy those parks and things, I think the accessibility is the thing to hone in on, not the price. Then to also own, the same thing with regard to the culture, is teach people the secret handshakes, teach them the culture of St. Louis, teach them how to navigate it, how to play along with the nepotism and the high school thing, and to open that door. I think that everyone in St. Louis has a role. They're at the cubicles, they're in the neighborhood, whatever it might be, they all have a role in talent attraction, in regional growth and expansion. You mentioned Peacemaker. Does anybody really understand what, do they know at Peacemaker, how that lobster roll?
Yeah.
I've actually seen it happen. I've seen people from Maine, from New England come in. They have the lobster roll and they go, okay, I can have my taste of home. La Pizza, in University City, whatever it might be, and go, how that turns into a department of 60. I've actually seen the evolution of that.
Yeah, I would argue, like,
what Lona's Little Eats has done or something like Balkan Treat Box, and people keep going back to same old, and how to discuss Emo's Pizza versus helping them find that taste of home, how to bring pork steak.
Emo's is a perfect example
Right.
of St. Louis style pizza, right?
Right.
Everybody sees the Kimmel skits and
Right.
shit where
Right.
it's John, defending,
Right.
And it's funny, as a St. Louisan, like if I had a list of 20 restaurants with St. Louis style pizza, you know what number 20 would be?
Right.
Emo's.
Right.
Emo's.
Right.
But I think,
that's the cool factor. Like for newbies coming in,
It's going to be cool, by the way.
I think what you're
Sarah's,
saying, though,
Yeah.
I think what you're saying though is the gap, right? It is all of the things you mentioned, all of those very cool places, all the very cool things that we're doing. Those are all part of the quality of life, and I think one of the things that what we miss here is that we make we make something that is a thing, like, Peacemaker. It is a thing. Or the Arch is a thing, and we
Right.
make it the thing,
Right.
and it allows people to say, "Yeah, but I don't care."
It
right?
takes
I'm not
some
moving to St. Louis.
customization,
I'm
yeah.
not moving to St. Louis for a lobster roll.
Thrifting, like that's something that's totally under the radar that has taken over the world.
Found by the pound.
And
baby.
I'm like, thrifting has been a thing here for 25 years. I mean, the vault was on
Oh,
Oprah 20 years ago.
But I think that-
Avalon.
Avalon, and I'm like, and then their kid goes, then the kid goes, okay, you know what, Mom and Dad, this place is really cool. I think I can make it. And then Mom and Dad say yes to the position, and then they start hiring people from all over the country. And so the evolution of some of these smaller and cultural factors are, and how the butterfly effect, so to speak, of those things are a huge asset that I don't think St. Louis really knows how to utilize.
So what's the primary?
It could be done much better.
What's the primary bug zapper? Is it crime? Is it?
No, they're
is
not.
it-
No, they're literally, and from where, and some of the people that I move here, most of them are coming from markets where I
crime's
want to say
everywhere.
crime isn't an issue, but they are coming from markets where they are. Let me just say they are not afraid.
What is
In
your?
fact, they see it as more of an opportunity.
What is the number one handcuff that maybe comes across your implementations more often than not?
I mean, for sure, the number one handcuff affecting it. So they're not afraid. Let me rephrase. They're not afraid once they're here. They're actually quite confused. It's not, but they are afraid from afar when they're looking at the metrics of St. Louis.
Bingo.
So we're looking at the top 10 list. So if the St. Louisans truly understood how many people are stopped upstream and they don't even get on the plane, because what happens, they start looking at these top 10 lists. As Google starts to go away, and maybe Sam Altman being from here, he can throw in a nice pitch in ChatGPT.
Right.
But
So they'll start to ask him. But the first thing that happens is you're going to go on a trip to St. Louis, or you're going to get a job offer in St. Louis. What's the first thing that you do as a family? You immediately get online and you start looking.
TripAdvisor. blah, blah,
Correct,
blah.
and that is all of that is a circus. I mean, it
Yeah.
is a mess. You've got some YouTube videos, you've got some things, or you've got the sizzle reels that don't really do anything, or they're seeing something that we're among the most dangerous cities in the world. So they're actually deeply afraid from the moment they land.
Paid for by Jeffco Moleg.
The other thing that they think of that I've actually found just as bad as the crime is they think that we're teeny tiny. So they think we're this super small city of, tens of thousands of people. And when they need to start to take a look at, they see the airport, they see the highway, they see the office, they see the Card Stadium, and they go, I got it, I saw it. And so one of the things that the city, county, and that our weird structural anomaly has done is it makes it look like Champaign, Illinois.
Right.
And it is not that. That makes them think that there's one school district where the kids can learn, not 10 blue ribbon school
Oh, it's that
districts.
simplistic St. Louis population search.
Correct. And then because that denominator's low, then all their family and loved ones are getting online from, I don't care if it's India or wherever they might be looking, then they're worried.
Yeah.
So they're going, look, you've got 3 offers. That's starting to change, but it's just easier for the site selection committee and the company to move to North Carolina, because that company in Germany, it's just an easier fit, even if we do our job. So I don't think that people fully grasp what that division does upstream, and stops how it's stopping quite literally the jumbo jets of accredited investors, of scientists, of people who want to, people contributing to your philanthropy. Oh, that's another great thing you can do. Getting on a board, being part of all of the different ways that you can be a part of that thing. So the shoppers, the everybody that's coming here that could really be impacting, investing, and changing the St. Louis market in a way that I think we would want. We could use 100,000 more people. We also don't have all of these other markets. You mentioned Denver. I can't really speak to Charlotte. I don't know as well, but they are trying to build infrastructure after the population is there. And I know we have some things that we really need to do in terms of housing and infrastructure. But if you look at Phoenix, look at Las Vegas, look at some of these markets, they're trying to build up after.
Yeah,
and
they're
it's a
screwed.
mess.
They're screwed.
And so we actually have room. There's a lot of work that we would need to do, but we have the infrastructure here. We don't have the pedestrians and we don't have the people. And that is the other big factor, is when they see emptiness, that's a huge concern. So
It's self-reinforcing.
it's self-reinforcing. So when they come in and they look at it, they don't know, even the street that we're on. I mean, Midtown Alley and this is an unbelievable street, but if you were to just go down it by yourself, or you were to go into the Grove, or
Noon
you were
on
to
a
go-
Wednesday. Yeah.
Correct. You just have I don't care where you are.
Yeah.
I mean, I had somebody right at Hanley and Wydown, right by the Botero statue, some of the most beautiful food, one of the best food corners and clusters in St. Louis. It looks like it's totally empty. Now even the Central West End. And so how can we get them to see what's here, to sort of be a part of that, but also to get some of that migration to where we could handle, we could probably handle 100,000 more people,
I think
soon.
I think one of the issues, and this is the glass half full, is that going back to the point is we have all of the assets, we have all of the resources, we do have what the population wants. We are just the plumbing is so out of sync. Instead of being a straight line, we've got figure eights and cutoffs and all of these kind of false starts across the board that are confusing to somebody outside. And it goes back to what you're talking about, this dysfunction internally. I think it has, the easy and simplistic answer is, we just need to merge the city and county. Merging the city and county isn't unto itself.
Yesterday.
Yes, but that isn't the obstacle, right? The problem is, the problem goes back to...
It would help things statistically from afar.
For a site selection group.
Yeah.
But the site selection group is also, we're thinking about the customer, and we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
If somebody asked me, Dave, if you were, nobody said if I was in charge, but if I was in charge and I was directing the economic development strategy, I think the top of the tree, hardest fruit to grab for St. Louis today is a Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 corporate relocation. It doesn't make sense. And in fact, it may not be what we want, because the story of St. Louis is a lot of, to your point, these quiet, privately held companies that went public, that got acquired, and then poof, they left. When St. Louis was really in its heyday, and I think it's important to remember, 1860s, World's Columbian Exposition, St. Louis was already an old money city.
Yep.
Chicago was the upstart, scrappy, toxic wasteland city. So, St. Louis has always been a merchant class. I mean, this is a very,
For sure.
almost a Medici city, right?
Yeah, since the 1890s. Yeah.
And that's okay, right? I think where I have this problem is that we very often try to brand ourselves or communicate ourselves as something that we are not, nor that we can be. And so there's a product market mismatch. And I think to your point earlier,
it's okay that we're not.
To me, if St. Louis said, look, here's what we're going to do. We have all of the assets, all the amenities, the private airports, the public airports, the logistics and everything else to be, let's say, quiet luxury without the price tag.
Yeah.
That's a dog that hunts, because people know what that means. If I said quiet luxury without the price tag, I can make all the assumptions I want. Most of them are positive.
Yeah.
And that allows me to fill in the blanks. I think what we get wrong is that St. Louis has become the operating zone of public relations and corporate communications firms. We've lost this marketing feel, which is, fundamentally irrational, right? We're trying to explain and define what it is to an increasingly small and disinterested population, trying to say, please come here. And to your point, it's thirsty.
Yeah.
When what we should be doing is saying, look, it's quiet luxury without the price tag. And all of a sudden, ears perk up and they say more.
Well,
then it opens the
but
conversation.
who are you talking to? Let me play devil's
well,
advocate
here's
here,
the other problem.
I've got a 20-year-old that in 2 years is going to be graduating from Belmont in Nashville.
Yeah.
And if somebody said to him, hey, keep quiet luxury without the price tag, he would look at them like,
Well,
is this ancient England?
This goes back to the other question that I have a significant problem in St. Louis is that we're in such decline, in such rapid decline. We have to pick a product, pick a customer and sell them that product. We can't do it all at the same time. Now, you'll get some knock-on effects from that. So the question to me, and I don't have the exact answer, the question to me is, who is the highest potential customer for St. Louis? And it may be that it is what Anthony's talking about. It may be a middle manager, young executive.
Well, I mean, we can just ask them.
A 32-year-old versus the early professional.
What is the demo that you see is the easiest sell right now?
Well, I guess the question is, where could you find 100,000 people to move to St. Louis in the next 5 years? What demographic is that? Because it's not early career professionals, because we just don't have that, and there's not enough executives to do that. So the question then is, what demographic fills that middle, and what would have to be true?
I would go to right now. If I were, I would go to very large and saturated markets, and I would address graduates from those markets.
Yeah,
so I would go to the Northeast.
Yeah.
I would go all over Florida. I would go. Texas is a little bit different. I would go all over California, and just let them know there is another option. There's a door number 3 here.
Yeah.
That you maybe
just a trim,
have
not a
never
full
even,
cut, not
have
a
you never
shave.
even thought about yet. And there is a world where, instead of resisting that we're stuck in 1996, own it.
Yes.
Be like, actually, this is the land of retro and record stores, and it's like you want to go to Blockbuster Video? There's still a Family Video over here on, if I look at my nephews and I look at the young talent, they love that stuff. So some of the things from the baby boom generation, the grandparents, a lot of the things that they idealize from that time, we still have it.
There's a lot of stuff in the news right now about the Jones Dome.
Yeah.
And anybody who asks, I would tell them, you don't need to tear that thing down.
Right.
All you need to do is make it a 2025 version of a 1980s shopping mall,
Right.
and people would lose their minds.
Right.
If it had neon lights and cool design from the 80s, and it was throwback and nostalgia,
Right.
And it felt like you were walking into Stranger Things.
The vintage and the nostalgia and the Stranger Things, and this is still a land when a kid can get on a bike, where a kid can still be a kid.
Yes.
All of these factors, they really do. They push it. They win over people from anywhere from around the world, but they have to be, again, somebody has to thread that needle, and they have to see the bridge. They don't know that this is here or even a thing. I don't know what they're thinking, but they're thinking dystopia.
Well,
So let's look at the
They're
city.
thinking racism. They're thinking segregation.
But for a long,
Hold
time, the
on,
problem.
Dave.
Hold on.
Along those lines, I'm going to finish. I'm going to jump on what you're talking about. Along those lines, as far as like they don't see what they should see. Okay, from a marketing perspective, from a community marketing perspective, City Hall, GSL,
show that it's real. Show the grit. Do a little bit of what Detroit did.
Oh, I love Detroit.
Just some of the things that Cleveland, just show it as it is.
Baltimore did it.
Right.
Is doing.
Everyone has done it, and it works. It will pique the interest of, as long as they feel like there's a way to it. To makers, you're going to be an artist. You're going to be a musician. You want to be a chef. You mentioned the culinary scene. None of those chefs, a lot of those guys, Jarred Kraft, they literally did that exercise. Where am I needed? Kevin Nation did it. Where am I needed?
Yeah.
I think
where can I go, and then how can I learn about these? They have no idea about some of the culinary things and what's going on here. But
for a long time, the issue has been all of the marketing that's getting done has been, it's this weird kind of counterintuitive, overly smart approach, which is, if we can sell St. Louis to people who are already here, then they'll tell everybody that they know, and then they'll know about it. When you ask people anywhere else in the country or the world, what's the last ad you saw for St. Louis? The answer is never. And the counterpoint to that is every year about February or March, I can't listen to Pandora without hearing a Pure Michigan commercial.
Right.
And I think
Do those work? I mean, did Denver and Austin and Nashville have its pop because of a marketing campaign, or was it more?
No.
It's kind of like how the Bosnian community ended up in St. Louis. Was it a word of mouth?
Yeah, you need
situation?
it's the Mark Cuban theory. You know, it's one thing to be really, really good. It's the Galloway theory as well. Yeah. You know, you got to be good. You got to be smart. You got to know where boring makes money and focus on that. But more than anything, you got to get lucky. So in the case of St. Louis, when it came to Bevo,
Yeah.
no way we could have predicted that we would become a Bosnian
100,000.
destination. That was luck.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a yes and there. The yes and is, but someone had to come. And I think that's where, I think Galloway would also tell you, like, the reason why you'd rather be mediocre in New York than a rock star in St. Louis is because the chances of you having a breakout success in New York are much higher. Now, if you think about that on a civic standpoint,
But I think it's also defining the difference between hunters and gatherers and farmers.
totally agree. And so,
Because that's the other thing as a community and as we're trying to solicit, the whole New York sell has always been you can do anything, right? And most people are not entrepreneurs. Most people would never have the balls to start their own business. The vast majority of individuals want to be farmers.
Totally
They want
agree.
somebody else to fucking set it all up
Yeah.
and then be good at what they do.
great. But so along those same lines, if I want to be a farmer, like a real farmer, am I moving to Arizona or am I moving to Iowa? Right. So I think there's some level of, this goes back to that disconnect. So St. Louis has been trying to make entrepreneurial tech sector a thing for as long as I've been here and more. The issue, though, is that this is not that place. And the evidence for that is, Jim McKelvey said this on the Winning STL podcast. He said, the reason I'm in St. Louis building my business here is because nobody else is.
Yeah.
And that's not, and we tried to play that as a positive, but that is in fact a distinct negative. And when you listen to the tech and entrepreneurial sector talk about the gap is we have these early stage venture capital firms and no follow on. And the reason for that is the conservative attitude, which the issue becomes we want to be those things and we want to be a tech and entrepreneurial place because we see the prosperity that it's brought to places like Los Angeles, Dallas, Austin, San Francisco, Seattle, and all these other places. The issue is that it's a cultural mismatch. And so what Anthony and I have talked about, and again, if they were going to put me in charge, I would say St. Louis, along with being sort of a quiet luxury without the price tag, is our economic development strategy should be entirely focused on privately held, closely held or privately held businesses where the owner can wake up one day and say, you know what, I think I'd rather be there, and attract all of those jobs in that capacity there. It may be a little bit of a harder sell because it's personal, like what Anthony does, but it's also a lot more likely that somebody who owns the whole business can snap their fingers and relocate than it is to get a corporate board.
So
and
let me ask a question along those lines, the personality aspect of it, and I want to get into a slight political lean here, and that being the state of Missouri. We're pretty popular nationally when it comes to our politics and the people that are representing us. When I think of Nashville's a perfect example, right? In 2000, whenever all this really started to slowly snowball, Nashville was extremely conservative as a city. And, oh, by the way, it wasn't part of the county, Davidson County. It was one of those outliers. Well, they fixed that. Now Nashville's grown. Now you have industry. You have Amazon there. You have everything going on. Dell just bought, 100 acres or whatever it is for a new...
Oracle.
And what comes along with that are coastal kids who are not conservatives for the majority of them, right?
Correct.
Cities like that have become purple very, very fast because of that growth.
Correct.
State of Missouri, I want to ask your opinion. How much does that come into play in the conversations? Because you said at the top end we have the issue with statistics when it comes to crime and all that, which we can all say they're misleading or they're not. It is what it is because of our structure. But how often does you're from that Hawley guy state, or you were the first state that banned
all the time
abortion?
Right.
How does that play out in your world Are the conversations accelerating? Are they getting more difficult? Are they getting easier? Because we're getting redder based on recent elections. So how does that come into play?
We break it down for them. So there's St. Louis, which is going to be very blue in large part in the city. There's going to be county. There's a lot of it that's purple. So there's some of that legacy of Danforth and Eagleton and the purple nature. Differently politically, St. Louisans, by and large, are a little bit more private about their political leanings and affiliations. So I have had a lot of people come from markets like California, New York, Washington, D.C., where they're at their very first dinner party ever and they have no idea how anybody voted. And there's actually some interest in that. So in many ways but yes, kind of what we were just talking about before, they don't know that there's an international community. They don't know that there's 20,000 Indian folks living in St. Louis. Mm-hmm. They don't know that they don't know there's a Jewish community. They don't know that they literally don't know whether it's German or Brazilian or whatnot. So they will say, somebody like me coming, who looks like me, or who's from this religion or background, they are concerned that there's going to be pitchforks, so to speak, waiting. They do see the things of segregation, and so they have questions about, is my son going to get pulled over? It's not just about crime, but just, is there anybody like us?
Profiling.
About the profiling and what they've heard, things of that nature. Absolutely, it is at the tip top, I would say. It was at the back of the conversation when we're talking to them, wherever they are, and now it's to the front, probably 1, 2, or 3. And so helping people understand that there's Missouri and Missouri, they're very different places.
Yeah.
There's St. Louis and Missouri, they're very different places. There's Kansas City, they're very different places. North, south, whatever a lot of people talk about Pennsylvania, there's Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and Alabama in the middle.
You're right.
But whatever it is, however they want to participate, whether they're more on the conservative side of the fence and they have interest there, or whether they're on the really progressive side of the fence and they want to turn red states blue, there is that opportunity. There are all of those conversations, kind of back to, this is where you're needed. Whether you're in public health, whether you're in whatever your initiative might be it the arts, be it healthcare, whatever it is that you're trying to bring, here is sort of the canvas to do that. Mm-hmm. And just how can we kind of bridge that, but also help them get that understanding. I mean, I still think of, crazy as this is to say, I still think of it as somewhat of a purple place. I don't know necessarily compared to where they're coming from. You have to understand, I'm moving people who are coming from, California, that are coming from places where they've never met even a middle, like a remotely conservative or libertarian person in their whole life.
Yeah.
So here, there is some interest there that there's just. I
only read about these on Twitter.
Right. I've seen these. I've heard about these, but there's also that Missouri and St. Louis
Excuse me,
too.
Sir, are you cat turd? Are you cat?
Well, we also, and not that we don't have towny and insular St. Louisans, of course we do, but what they often find is that because the northern, like we know, I've had people say this to us all the time. Wow, you really understand north, south, east, and west. They don't. Yeah. They are really in a bubble. And so in many ways, I don't see St. Louis as the echo chamber that even the markets from which they're coming really are. Yeah. And so they're like, look, I need to get out of DC. I need to get out of New York. There is this whole world west of the Hudson, that are coming from schools. And, San Francisco, same thing. They have no idea how rich and textured and all of the opportunities that are here that exist.
Let's do this. Let's take a real quick break, and then we'll come back for a short segment. We can't let you go without talking about new mayor, and then we got to be positive for a little bit here. We got to talk about the things we can sell well, like, for example, we do have a lot of record stores. And if you happen to go to a record store, go check out Maness Brothers. Maness Brothers. Two good old boys from the South Side. They drink Busch beer. High life. Shh. Busch. Here you go. We're out of here. Pain. Be right back. All right, we're back. Got another, gonna roll in with some more St. Louis here. Scrub and Ace Ha, another one of those guys, grew up in Olivet, hung out in the record stores. And to the point, this is what we've been talking about, right? Like, this is the stuff that nobody knows about. You know, and it's been here the whole
time.
Freaking time.
Yeah.
We call them, I had no idea this was here tours.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I host one of these tours? Like,
Hell yes.
I would have a blast.
Just music alone.
Can I curse on these tours?
Music, soccer, yeah, amen.
Oh, Zach. Oh,
Yeah.
we'll do it at Amsterdam Tavern. Dude.
Amsterdam Tavern has also done more to recruit to this city than you could possibly imagine.
I look. Matt is one of my best friends.
That
and
place absolutely crushes it for talent, for recruiting. I mean, the whole soccer world in general definitely does. But I think we've been known so long as a baseball town, and
Cardinal
and
Nation.
we are. But the real asset under the radar, the tennis community, the soccer community,
Lacrosse community.
Padel is like taking over all of these different things, pickleball, what have you. But these are also options that, it's a land where you can actually, we're talking about enjoying the amenities. You can actually get to the golf course.
Well,
you could join a club. I mean, their clubs, not, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 is, it's a lot. I can't do it, but these people are coming from markets where it's $250 to start to join a club.
Yeah, you talked about earlier. We were alluding to kind of the grit factor, and we're trying to how do you define yourself? Because you don't want to get in the weeds. You don't want to. We were not joking. We were poking a little bit of fun at the Blues History Museum, and it's like, and I think we do that because we're here. It's like growing up as a kid here. The McDonald's riverboat, I get it.
Right.
We once a year on a field trip, but every other kid that I met at soccer tournament driving around the Midwest, they're like, "Oh my God, you're from St. Louis? They got McDonald's on the river," and weird things like that. And to the point, like talking about Amsterdam Tavern, right?
Yep.
When you can balance and you can integrate and weave in and out kind of the neighborhood vibe. Clearly the most popular sport in the world is soccer, and it's the fastest growing sport in America.
And particularly the early professionals you're talking about, they wanted to know, they want to go to the soccer bars.
Yeah. And on the wall there is a perfect example of we as St. Louis or St. Louis as a business, we need to do a better job of this thing. And you go in there, and in the middle of the bar on the left-hand side, there's a picture, and it's the starting 11 from the 1950 World Cup team, right? And everybody's kind of heard that, whether you're a soccer fan or not, you've heard the lore, right? We beat England 1-0.
Right.
The cooler fucking story is that 6 of those starters that are in that photo we all grew up on the hill a couple blocks away from one another. And the cooler thing is a number of years back, one of the regulars at the bar had bought the picture at an auction and literally mailed it all over the country so he can get all the he got 5 of the 6 to autograph it, right? So, and that's just sitting there on the wall.
Why didn't I know that? That's so cool.
And
I've taken probably 200 people to that bar, and I missed that. But yes, I mean, do they know who Becky Sauerbrunn is?
No.
Do they know that 2 of the players in the national team were from those stories? They're people from out of town, or particularly people who are moving here, are riveted by those stories.
Well, you know what it is? It's the Olympic effect. We all watch the Olympics. We don't give a shit about 99% of the sports.
Yeah.
But if there's an American in the final playing for a medal, I'll watch curling for Christ's sake.
You know where I have to take families on tours now? Chaminade.
But wait,
all the kids.
Yeah, they want the NBA.
They want to
vibe.
They want to see the NBA vibe, and I'm like, we don't have the
and
NBA team, but all the hockey players, the NBA lovers. I go, we don't have professional basketball, but we've got youth basketball. Some of the best in the world, and so that's a huge.
But wait,
Amsterdam has been amazing.
What you have to have first is you have to have the Olympics. You have to have the NBA. And I think where we get it wrong, and then I'm going to flip my positive switch on, where we get it wrong here is we try to make the story about the picture and the history, the Olympics. I think this is where we get our message.
I'm totally
going
to debate you on this one because I don't view it that way. As a St. Louisan, as a lifelong soccer player, lover, as the host of the popular Soccer Dad Pod, it's not about the history. It's about the legacy. It's about the connectivity between me and that bar and the family members and everything else, knowing that this is the incubator.
But wait,
because I get burnt out on the history lessons that St. Louisans toss out all the time.
But are you moving from Boston to St. Louis because of that?
Yeah, and here's why. Because when you get into niche groups, especially soccer, right? You go to any city in this country, go to a grade school. I challenge me on this. Anybody listening? You stand outside and you look at all these kids at 3 o'clock when that bell rings, and you look at the kids, and what are you looking for? You're looking at what are they wearing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I can tell you right now, I don't care what the market is. If you're in Boston, they're not wearing Red Sox kits. They're wearing Liverpool. They're wearing Bayern Munich. They're wearing Barcelona, Messi, etc. It's that culture, right? So here, what happens is if you have a city, because there are a few meccas in the world when it comes to soccer, and in America, I'll argue that it is St. Louis.
I would too.
So if you have that connectivity, I guarantee somebody will be like, because to your point, you were just talking about, the current national team. Here's the crazy thing about the current national team, right? It's the golden generation of players in U.S. soccer. We have the best players we've ever had. That's what they claim. On a given day, right now, in that roster, you could have 3 players of the 11 starting that not only are from St. Louis, 2 of them went to the same high school, and all 3 of them played at the same youth club.
That's
okay. But wait,
wild.
I don't have the answer to this question. And so then, how many people in the last decade have moved to St. Louis because of its rich soccer history?
No. I'm not saying that is, nobody's going to wake up and say, I want to move to a soccer city. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that if you're trying to sell the auxiliary benefits.
Totally agree.
I don't care if it's Tina Turner or Chuck Berry or John Goodman or Sterling K. Brown or John Hamm, Jenna Fisher or Nikki Glazer. One of the tragedies, I think, of St. Louis is that the commodity is kids.
Bingo.
And then the commodity it's not, our commodity isn't beer or baseball or finance, is that we export the talent. So knowing that they are from here, so they go, wow, what is up with the schools in St. Louis? What's up with childhood in St. Louis? How can we look at it? I mean, you mentioned Jim McKelvey before. People are riveted by the fact that Jim McKelvey, Jack Dorsey, and Sam Altman we're all from St. Louis.
MICDS.
And everyone goes, okay, that's actually, that does grab their attention. I don't know that it would be an international migration, but whether you're looking to get into oil and gas, you are going to go to Houston. Whether you're looking to get into hedge funds, you're going to go to Greenwich. Whether you're going to look in, so, kind of what is our, I would argue that all roads in some level lead to ag tech and plant science if you are in that world, but that's kind of a weird niche thing. But, I have a place to raise my kids. I have a place where take what you have to do to drive kids around, to just take practice. Now I need you to throw the Atlanta Metro on top of everything that you're doing.
Or the 635 loop.
Or a travel team in, Phoenix. I mean, so there are some angles I think that you can take that would work.
So let's talk St. Louis real quick, as I alluded to before the break. I wanted to talk about the local politics, specifically the most recent mayoral election.
Yeah.
We got a newbie in there now, Miss Kara Spencer. Had been cutting her teeth for a while down there on Cherokee as an alderman down in that area. You've been working the neighborhoods for a long time, working within the city. You obviously, I'm sure, probably had some eyeballs on that race. She wins. 45-day State of the Union, or however many days it's been. Kind of what's your take on the transition, early optics, maybe your own personal expectations?
Is this me personally, or what my newcomers are seeing and finding? And
through the lens, you personally, through the lens of your business.
Through the lens of the business, I think what I like so far about so many of our issues are not, again, we're below the ice, we're above the hurricanes, we have this tornado issue, of course, but we have a lot of the stuff. I think our issues really are social and political. And so I do think that our local politicians are a huge factor as far as, say, growing the city, whatever it might be. So there's a couple of things that we want to know. People are deciding to move here. Do we have our shit together? And the other thing that I think is a big factor in terms of that race is, do we have politicians and local leaders who are willing to, in some regard, acknowledge what's broken?
Yep.
And that I found a lot of the people in the political realm in years past, they're very defensive. They have sort of two modes. They're super defensive and they're highly promotional. And then there are those going, can we acknowledge some of the things that aren't working? And can we accept and still operate with the understanding that this isn't perfect? And then what is our role? So I found that I do think that a lot of people have a lot of big interest in Kara Spencer. I like that she's young. I like that she's cool. I think
she's got a vibe.
That kind of thing
that matters.
And I'm sorry, but that kind of thing matters.
Yeah.
It really does. If we're sort of seen as sort of this older, she has a vibe. I think I do think that I do think that those kind of optics will help. Mm-hmm. What we need most are, I think, who among the St. Louis community, in terms of the St. Louis political community, are we willing to sort of maintain kind of our tribal status quo, or are we willing to maybe look at some cooperation? And right now we're very, very, very competitive. And I'm most interested in people. For me personally, I have to really see this as a region. So my job is to get people on the plane and get them to the region.
Yep.
Now, whether they end up in Chesterfield or they end up in the city of St. Louis or they end up in the county or the Central Corridor or Edwardsville or Belleville or whatnot, that is among kind of our leaders and a lot of other factors here.
Right.
But what I want is any local politician to really understand that some of these, when we talk about tax credits and ordinances and laws and the fine print of lawmaking, the fine print of governing, is very different than marketing.
Yeah.
And there are those who are, I think that, so there are those who are fixing potholes is one thing, and then working on the branding of St. Louis and selling St. Louis. So to answer directly, I feel like, and I think Tashara too had it to some extent as well, but I think it's important that our politicians are a vibe. It's important that they're cool.
Well, I think,
like, for lack of a better word, they're cool.
You touched on it, and like my number one takeaway with the election cycle of this most recent the first round of the ranked and then the final election, I was so internally torn and frankly mad that the vast majority of the narratives and the debates and the talking points had to do with picking up trash, filling potholes.
Correct.
I'm like, like
That's table stakes.
If I am one of your potential clients and I take a second and scroll Twitter St. Louis and maybe I'm interested in politics,
Exactly.
and I start to read that, I'm like, holy
It's
fuck,
snow
they don't
plows.
know how to pick up their goddamn trash.
Right.
Here's
Yeah.
And
the
that's
snow-
not a uniquely St. Louis problem. I mean, New York had massive
Yeah.
issues with that multiple times, but
here's what I
we need to talk about something else.
Here's what I see in the last 45 days. I see highly
Half full or half empty? Where are we going?
totally half full.
Sweet.
I see highly competent disaster management
Yeah.
that you would expect from any major metro, and I'm almost shocked at how good and how responsive and how on the ground it's been. The hopeful concern that I have, and you're seeing some inklings of this, and I'm not sure where it will mature to, is I don't know if we'll miss the opportunity, which is always the secondary part. So where I give like high commendation for where we are now is I don't think that 12 months ago, 48 months ago, anybody would have expected such a high quality and coordinated response to a tornado ripping through the West End in North St. Louis as we have had today. And so I think that's full stop, celebrate that.
It's a 100-year event.
World-class leadership there.
I think she did a great job of, and I don't know if this was on purpose, because you zoom out, you look at Missouri politics, there's not a lot of love from Jeff City to want to help anything
Major issue.
inside of 270, let alone north of Delmar. But how many pictures have we seen with her and Kehoe in the same frame?
Right.
Like,
I couldn't
that's
agree.
smart.
I think the politics is good, and knowing the people who surround her, she's got really good advice on that. Now, the halfway to negative view is where I
There it is.
where I think where I am concerned that we'll miss the opportunity is in missing some of the follow-up pieces. So what typically happens, in my view, in a lot of these disasters, is you have, let's say a month after the event where it's disaster response and triage. And then what ends up happening, and this is where every community starts to suffer, is that there is some manner of relief, but no solution. And you don't start getting into the rebuilding or solution portion of this until 6 months down the road. And I think, like I had written about this, and I think where our opportunity is the day after that tornado, you should have had all the bankers in town saying, what is it that we will be able to commit as lending back into this neighborhood that would create a sustainable market going forward? And where I see some stumbling blocks here are statements like, these houses are only appraising at $86,000, but we know that they're worth way more than that. Well, the market is what it is. And so for us to set the tone that there is somehow more value here than the market is showing, I think is setting up for failure. And I hope that the follow-on to that is not some kind of zany direct response program.
That's kind of a real estate weeds debate.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Because, I mean, both of us are in real estate, right? Do appraisals really matter?
Well,
because I'm going to tell us when they start to show up. Oh, what's this listed for? What are you guys looking for? What's the contract for? And then they do the appraisal.
Totally.
And guess what?
Totally agree.
We're on number.
And my view on any of the talent attraction standpoint, on the investment standpoint, on the opportunity for St. Louis is demand, demand, demand. So how do you take something like an F3 tornado ripping through these neighborhoods and turn it into a market-driven demand engine to deliver on all of the things that St. Louis has promised to these people for generations? And that's where you can't start that 6 months after. You got to start it today. And there's people like me and others with the luxury to think about it while the response is happening.
Well, let me ask you, Anthony, your take, because this has gone through my head regarding post-tornado kind of optics. It feels like for the first time in a long time, when it comes to communicating to my national friends in other markets, that this is almost like it's not going to replace, and I don't want to diminish, but it is superseding the Ferguson narrative. This was a huge disaster, and they've all seen the pictures. And they're like, holy shit, because everybody saw those quick trips burning too. right?
Yeah.
Have you seen the picture of the path through Forest Park
Yeah.
up north?
Well,
I think
I just played the golf course yesterday, and I couldn't believe it.
I know.
it's wild.
And here's where what I want to ask you is like, the numbers are going to come out. This thing is going to be well north of $1 billion, probably closer to 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 range.
Yep.
You know, I mean, that's catastrophic.
Yep.
So there's going to be, right now there's videographers on the ground, there's podcasters on the ground. These stories are going to percolate. So if our recovery efforts can keep pace and continue to do what we've seen here in the first 2 weeks or so, 3 weeks, well, however long it's been, like, I see it as an opportunity to not eliminate the memory of what happened in 14 up north, but we need, instead of people thinking of St. Louis as, isn't that close to Ferguson? It needs to be, hey, it's St. Louis. It's that city that recovered from the tornado.
Yep.
You know, do you see that as possible with what's going on?
I do. I mean, if you look at the history of so many cities, it's after a tragedy. I wish it was for any other reason.
Katrina.
Yeah. But if you look at from the fires, you know, San Francisco, the earthquakes, you look at the building and the development and what's happened in so many of the markets. Katrina is a great example. Look at Chesterfield and the flood of '93, and then look at what that has become. How can we kind of take that tragedy, take it into an opportunity, and again, look at, so like right now, The Twister just came out on Netflix, so people were often associating Joplin with St. Louis, but they can never draw. Now, that is a factor. Look at the movie in HBO, Atomic Homeland, so the factor with
They also,
toxic waste.
They also
Right.
Winter's Bone.
And then you have Ferguson, Winter's Bone, Ozark.
Filmed in Atlanta.
But to me, right. Why was that, right? So I like that they finally put the issues back. They're bringing back the tax credits, all of those factors. I mean, if I just think about what I used to be in film finance and posters and advertising funding, and look at what Up in the Air did, or the soccer movie that you mentioned.
Game of Their Lives.
Yeah, Game of Their Lives. So David Onspaugh's movie. I do think those things, they do matter. I wish it weren't for that kind of notoriety, but also, or for that tragedy, excuse me. But it does. There is an opportunity there to where maybe some of the things, particularly on the north side too, are going to start to get the focus that maybe it hasn't. And then if, I would divert to Dave, but if we can kind of do that right in terms of the recovery, you really do see a paradigm shift in a lot of these cities where big tragedies and natural disasters have happened in the past, and the next iteration can be pretty spectacular.
So if you get it right, you get people talking about St. Louis and the opportunity and the lightning in the bottle that you can capture from that is, whoa, they had this tornado rip through this urban environment. Their disaster response and triage was world class. Oh, and by the way, then their business, entrepreneurial, and et cetera, community leveraged that into a urban renewal unknown to most other areas. And I think in a lot of cases in St. Louis, it's the missed opportunities that are so frustrating because we, instead of aiming for the inflection point or transformational opportunity, we sort of regress into good enough, and things happen like, we're going to take some Rams money and we're going to do direct response, and then that'll sort of stabilize, and then we'll get to it in 6 months. And you lose that momentum in such a way that by the time you do deliver it, the zeitgeist is gone, and you're a follow-on, and then all of the response from there becomes negative instead of transformational. And that's where I am scratching my head and waiting to see where the leadership takes place, because it is such to your point as well, an opportunity on an international level to demonstrate competence and innovation and otherwise in the response to this because of everything that has happened
Yeah.
in that area since the 60s and 50s. And
I mean,
afterwards.
I completely agree from what we expect and what should happen with our local leadership and the local business community. But let's not kid ourselves. If the federal government via FEMA doesn't step up with the appropriate number, all these great ideas.
That's going to be the scary part.
Well, but wait, they haven't stepped up in other places that had tragedies under the Biden administration, and so Asheville is still recovering. I can never remember where they had the hurricane.
No, this isn't a whataboutism. We're talking
It's
about
not
St.
what
Louis
about.
North
It's
Side.
not what about. But I don't think we can hang our hat on the fact that
I think when you're in the $1 billion range plus, you can absolutely hang your hat on FEMA,
Yeah, but
because that's what it's there for, and and that is the intent. So either it matters, and those people matter, or they don't.
And I think that the critical part here to what you're saying, Dave, is going to be the response. So look at the fires. What's the matter with me in
California.
Altadena and,
Right, and
Pacific Palisades.
in the Palisades, it's really not, we can't change or prevent the weather from happening, but it is about the response and the technology and what happens. And so are we going to be able to do that? So for right now, I mean, I've said this a couple of times, ironically before the tornado is probably more, but we've been seeing all of these climate refugees come to St. Louis. Mm-hmm. So I've got people who are down in Texas who have, 4 months of 100-degree plus. They're concerned about whether or not they're going to be able to flush the toilets in Florida soon.
Or the grid
Correct.
stays
And
up,
then-
or they
and
can
then-
get homeowners.
And none of them are getting reinsured or getting the insurance of the homeowners. So
Right.
all of these factors. So if we can prove that we had the event that we had, but then we could also get insurance, or that the insurance will pay and that FEMA will pay.
Isn't it ironic
and that
that,
we'll
it's
see,
that it's a privately held company
Right.
down in the valley that actually
Right.
handles all that?
Right.
Well,
So
but
that will change. That would change literally, but that will change like quite in their new office that they no longer need to use.
But then also, I think also
my
with
God.
that, it's will the recovery, in California, the tragedy in a lot of ways was the fires, then it was the floods, but the real disaster
Is
the bureaucratic nightmare
Correct.
that comes after it, which is the Coastal Commission, the City of Los Angeles, this
18 months to even get a permit to rebuild anything.
Exactly.
Correct. So if
And-
we
and-
can show that, I think that will. It's the same thing, and all the way back to your political question, JB. It is what they want to know, what our clients want to know, what people coming is. Again, do we have our shit together politically? Are we something that plays? Do we have from our ordinances, from our laws? Are we friendly from taxes to whatever it might be? Do we have a culture of growth? Do we have a pro business, or do we have an abundance mentality? Do we have a scarcity mentality? These are all the things that they're learning. And yes, they do see. I think Michigan, Ohio, even some areas would look at our regulatory environment. These are all the types of questions that they have, and that we might need some work on. But that's not my field. I'm more into what I can do on the cultural side, on the vibe side, on the talent side. But then again, back to that fine print. We're often asking people who are stuck in the fine print of governing to also do kind of big picture 50,000-foot branding and marketing.
Right.
And I think it's time for a bifurcation.
It-
So you're asking the person who is fixing the potholes, so to speak, and trying to get laws passed to also brand and make St. Louis cool. And they need, and then you've got a lot of redundancy. And I think it's time to kind of let everybody get in their lane. You focus here, you focus there. And then we get everybody we unbundle, so to speak, and get the experts doing their thing. I think you might make some changes.
Yeah, I think we're in this weird world where, in my opinion, coming from a content perspective, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't need more 30-second Explorers
No,
commercials. with
no more
Sterling.
sizzle reels.
No.
We don't need those. We don't need. Frankly, we don't need another Up in the Air.
Bring
You
back
know,
the 60s
We don't need
jingles.
that. Here's what, in my opinion,
No
here's
one watches
here's
movies
your
anymore anyway.
here's your sweet spot, because you need to get people not just an endorphin from a reel, a 60-second burner, right? You need 7, 8, 9 minutes of that's cool.
Yeah.
You know, you walk in, just really
Yeah.
quick pub side chats, whatever it is, you know, because the depth of cultural value in so many of these institutions and experiences, and in not just food and beverage, I'm talking about a lot of other things that go on here. It's cool, you know,
Yeah.
and it's gritty. That's the only.
Yeah, and it's real.
Yeah.
It's still real.
So
it
let's-
has a soul.
Let's get to.
There's a yes and there though, because I think you do need some of those cool sizzle reels.
Oh,
but they have to be organic, because where we miss right now, somebody somewhere else who's never thought of St. Louis has to have some semblance of FOMO and say there's something happening here, and then I'm willing to watch the 9-minute.
Yeah,
thing.
if I see one more though, like, hey, I'm gonna go get tacos here, and it's the same bubble font, and you did it in Opus or you did it in Cut Cap, like, you know, any AI editing, like that's dead.
Yeah.
The people have to like give the viewer a little bit more respect.
Yeah.
You know, and time it out.
This-
so
this goes-
let's have
two things. So I would say some of the answers. So two things is, one is I think that reflects my view of this public relations and corporate communications approach to marketing, because it is logical to have that bubble text standardized, you know, hey, I'm going to go get tacos, and it's safe. And I think this is where we get into this kind of cultural piece of it is managerially safe. And what, you know, where I tend to categorize St. Louis is that, to your point, a different framing is we have middle managers who are who are risk averse and conservative, trying to do innovation, trying to do expansion, trying to do change, when their mindset and their mentality is on administration.
Yeah.
And this is where I think that the tornado is a great foil for this, is that the administration is top notch. And that is, by the way, the Midwest mindset, conservative, conservation-oriented, administrative attitude of middle management is excellent. But what we are asking those people to do, by the same token, is do these highly creative, innovative, high risk, high failure rate activities that they are simply not suited to do. But organizations like Greater St. Louis Inc. have commandeered the responsibility for these things and taken a highly conservative public relations and communications approach to this, and it has failed for 20 years.
So let's end the serious part on that. Let's have a little fun here before we roll out here. Let's just kind of run. We can freestyle this, run around the table. Let's do best of. I'll start, Anthony, because you know all the corners at this point. Yep. It's gonna be. I'm gonna start with some of the lame ones, just a little t-ball, and then we can, as we progress here, get a little more creative. First off, two-part question: thick flame-broiled burger or a smash burger? Second part is from where?
My smash is going to be Carl's in Brentwood.
How did I was gonna get.
you know, for sure. But I'm actually I'm a pub burger guy.
Yeah.
So it's a tough one. It would be between Michael's and O'Connell's. I would say O'Connell's. Yeah.
Dave, same question.
I'm the worst at this. I'm definitely not smash burger, definitely thick cut pub burger, and I'm really not big.
Medium rare. How do you cook it?
Medium,
Blood or no blood?
a little bit.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay, we can
Good
still
question.
hang out.
On the rare side of medium, but not medium rare.
Favorite.
Where's your smash?
My favorite smash.
Max?
No, actually, it's Perennial in Webster.
Oh, is it really?
Oh my God.
I've not had it there.
It's good.
I bet it's awesome.
Yeah, it's really good.
Actually, I'll jump it. Annie Guns. That's the burger.
That's you. Do you live in Wildwood?
Yeah.
I might.
Yeah.
I don't hate that choice either. A lot of good burgers, but
Favorite pub to have a drink alone?
Good one. Let's do Fox and Hound.
Are you-
Cheshire.
Little people watching in there.
Yeah.
That's a fun one.
Yeah.
Dave.
I'll actually, it's the basement in my house, and that is actually, by the way, the biggest obstacle to growth in St. Louis is basement culture, because I don't have to go anywhere to get all the amenities. But I also live 15
not
minutes
wrong.
down the road from anywhere. So
Yeah.
Date night restaurant, sub $100 total. Where are you taking her?
Basso.
I don't know. Is there such a thing as sub $100?
That's the hard part.
I'm gonna go to I would do Little Fox,
Oh, nice call there.
Louis, and Stu's Food and Liquor. Maybe.
Yeah. Favorite venue for rock and roll, or any show?
When it happens, I would say Joe's Cafe. If you could do that, and then I would say, I would have said BB's when it was around, but now I will do. God, what's the matter with me? Keep going. That's where I would have said.
Dave, are you a rock and roll guy? You buy tickets, you go watch live music?
It's been a long time because I've got young kids, and there's really no venue in Wildwood. Although Steinberg Group's done a terrific job at the Bomb Factory.
Oh, the Factory's awesome.
Factory,
Have you
yeah.
seen a show out
This is
there,
not about Dave.
Anthony?
What's that?
The Factory. You seen a show out there yet?
I've seen a show at the Factory. You know where else I went that I really liked was the St. Louis Music Park was cool.
Yeah.
You know who does great.
What's the one in South City though? It's unbelievable.
Off Broadway.
Thank you. Off Broadway would be my top.
I'll give a shout out.
I don't like too big.
I'll give a shout out, not on the rock and roll side, but on the cultural side, is we've seen a couple performances by the Bach Society, one at the Basilica and one at the Presbyterian Church in Kirkwood. Unbelievable. World class. Like we grew up in Los Angeles with world class symphonies.
Cathedral concerts at the Basilica is pretty crazy.
Every single bit as good as anywhere else.
So yeah, no, I'm with you. I went to Stiefel to see the SLSO.
Yeah.
They did the Radiohead OK Computer album.
Yeah.
SLSO.
Like I love the crossover stuff. And again,
Yeah.
to your point earlier, like most every major metropolitan city in this country has things like that.
Yeah.
Here, you
Yeah.
can do it.
Yeah.
You can get that ticket and sit 10 rows back for $60, $70 a ticket.
Correct.
I think on the positive side to things that would not attract me here to move, but I think would plug people in from places like New York, Brooklyn, Los Angeles, Dallas, is the quality of the fine arts in St. Louis as compared to other places. They may be 70% of the size and the magnitude, but they are 100% of the quality. And I don't think we tell that story nearly enough.
Well, that's our, and I'm going to end on this for myself. I mean, I've traveled coast to coast for work, kids, soccer, everything else. I'll put St. Louis food up, period. I don't care what
Same.
I don't care what the category is. Whether you want tacos, fine, we got you.
Right.
Pizza, fine. You don't like Provel,
It's
that's
not
okay.
everywhere, but it is here. You
Yes.
just have to know a little bit of where to go, and I'm
all
telling you.
breakfast.
It,
I think
it goes
we-
back.
I
to
think
the,
we
it goes
kill
back.
Oh, kill it.
What we said offline, which is St. Louis.
Southwest
St.
Diner,
Louis
come on.
is a St. Louis is a B-side city, and I think one of the things that has always economically, socially, and otherwise in St. Louis been attractive to me is that the lows are not nearly as low, but the highs are not nearly as high. But the availability of an 80% middle of the bell curve with some additions on the upward side are far and away better than most other cities.
I'm with you. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to roll
Buy
out
low,
of
sell
here.
high.
Anthony Bartlett from, oh my gosh. I'm going to...
Acclimate.
Thank you.
Acclimate. You can say St. Louis transplants. They'll know.
No, I wasn't going to do that. I started to. I was like, no, I'm not going to do that.
It's okay. We do help St. Louis transplants.
I like the replant. That's a market.
God, you're not kidding.
There's plenty of us
replants.
expats.
Also needs a whole lot of attention. It's another podcast.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, man. Hope you enjoyed it, and really, really appreciated the insight and the info. And best of luck moving. We'll have you back. We'll get
Such a pleasure to be here.
We'll
Seriously.
mix this up, and then Dave, as always, I'll give you solid B+ today, man. You're on point. I think it was the Friday afternoon, closer to half full kind of vibe. So well done. Apex Shrine on the way out. Yet another St. Louis band, a little burner, a little rock and roll, a little Van Halen influence. And by the way, we recorded this in my studio, so a little pride there. Thank you,
Sounds so
gentlemen.
good. Thank you.
Until next time.